Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear, and I'm joined today by my other two hosts.
Stu, welcome.
Hi, I'm May, as per usual.
And we're joined by a very esteemed guest today.
Esteemed, yes.
Esteemed.
Love that.
Yes, hello. I'm David McDarby. That's my name.
Well, welcome to the show. Before we do a little primer here before we start every episode, before we get into the thing that we always do. But first, we're going to be kind of talking about this absolutely gorgeous cube that Stu and I were just honored to play. And I'm using these words and I'm using them very strongly, but in all seriousness, this is probably the most fun that I've ever had playing cube. And it was the Live the Dream cube. And before we go any further down this road, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. We're going to start out with our guest. What are you having this evening, David?
Oh, hello. I'm quite boring. I have water with a liquid flavor enhancer, Mio strawberry watermelon. I drink a lot of... Yeah, this actually introduced me by David White, another cube conspirator that helped make the Live the Dream cube. On the weekday, I like drinking water, but sometimes I want something sweet, so I put some not calorie stuff into it, and it's a sweet little water. So there you go.
Look at you being responsible.
No.
Can't say I'm going to be relatable this time.
What you got
Since
for us
I'm going to
today,
go
man?
next, I'm having wine. Once again, being the wine snob.
The wine snob. Stu and I, Stu has graced us. Stu, you want to tell them what you're having here? This is amazing.
This is a bit of a repeat here on the show. We've got the Hidden Pipe Coffee Porter, and I don't need to introduce it anymore because it's delicious. Let's crank them.
And I would say that after we tested our jalapeno Sierra Nevada Pale Ale clone that I made, that I'll have about 2 cases that I'm going to bring to CubeCon. So if you're a lucky listener and you've tracked me down and there's some left, you're more than welcome to do a taste.
Yeah, you better get over it on like Thursday morning before 10 a.m. or you might be out of luck, I think.
And then you can be a lucky drinker. So there you go.
All right, so the Live the Dream cube. David, would you mind kind of giving us the premise, the idea, the design concept of this cube? Familiarize the listeners.
Yeah, sure. So this is a cube in a lot of normal regards, such as 540 cards. So 8 players, you see, 360 cards to the cube. Normal draft rules, you draft 3 packs of 15 or so. You play normal Magic. But it's designed to emulate a more Commander experience in regards of you don't, curve out 1, 2, 3 drops with aggro. You're playing big, flashy, colorful spells that do all kinds of wow things. You make crazy board states. And it's a home for all those 6-mana red enchantments that don't do anything when you cast them. You just get to live your colorful dream. All decks are 4 colors on average, and you get to play really bombastic, wild games of Magic.
Yeah, I think a card that actually spoke to me the most when I was cracking packs with you, myself, Stu, and I guess Justin Parnell was there as well.
Yep.
I saw Blasphemous Act in your cube.
Yeah, so Blasphemous... so another secret thing about the Live the Dream cube is generally outside of cards that make the game flow, like Fetch Lands and Mana Rocks, most cards have secret dreams involved with them. So you look at Blasphemous Act, you might be like, oh, it's just, a 4-ish mana wrath, depending how many creatures on the board. But there's Blast of Genius, so you can discard it to deal 9 to the opponent's face. There's stuff like Boris Reckoner and stuff like that, so you can cast it, maybe a Fire Emancipation out, so you deal 13 to Reckoner, you deal 39 to that, and then you redirect to your opponent to deal 39 times 3, 147 or something. So so every card in there kind of has a secret dream that you just have to tease out the more you play it.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of looking for.
See all the Johnny Jenny players salivating at the mouth.
Yeah, we just recently did an episode. We recorded an episode talking about Johnny Jennies, talking about Timmy Tammys.
Yep.
We talked about Melvin.
Melvin.
And then there's a couple of them. I'm forgetting. There's Spikes, and then there's Vorthos.
Yeah.
And I felt like after looking at this cube, it's kind of a combination of a Jenny Johnny, as May just stated, but then it's got that huge Timmy Tammy, big swingy, but it also has Melvin just layered deeply inside of this, right? There's, as you just said, there's a lot of intricate choose your own adventure type cards, Blasphemous Act being one of them that we kind of highlighted early on there.
Yep.
May, would you mind reading Blasphemous Act, the actual card, so that the audience is aware of it, please? I guess I should have prepared for that. I just popped it in there. She curves balls me all the time.
I'm just going to bring it up on the cube because I have it up. Blasphemous Act is an 8 and a red sorcery that it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. It deals 13 damage to each creature.
So the reason why this card spoke to me, and I'll give you a little history here. In my cubes, they're a lot more spiky. They're a lot more efficient. It's a different type of cube, right? Like you're doing these big bombastic plays where my cubes are still in low to the ground. And I have an Innistrad Uberbear's Horror Cube featured at CubeCon just like yours. But when I made the suggestion to run Blasphemous Act to my friends, they're kind of like, that's too slow. It's not good enough. It's board state dependent. You've got this whole other formula, right? This, like you just said, this different big dream that you're doing, David. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm sure you've heard of this fire design before, where you want cards to be fun, inviting, replayable, and exciting. The Live the Dream Cube does a few of those things. One thing it's not is very inviting, in that a lot of the cards featured in the cube have a lot of words on them, and I take that hit. I need to take that hit so that I can focus on other parts of the cube that I want to bring into the focus. For example, you could just have Wrath of God in the cube. It's got, I guess Day of Judgment has 3 words on it, and that could do the job. But Blasphemous Act has so many different little knobs and little hooks you can tie into the other cube, like based on its mana value, the damage it's doing, stuff like that. So this lets you have a more context-dependent and dynamic experience when you're drafting a deck that I really like players thinking about that as they're going through all these crazy cards when they're drafting.
I will say I definitely can attest to that. Even just early on in the first pack of drafting it, immediately the mindset of, oh, it's Blasphemous Act. It's a board wipe, essentially, because that's what I use it for in other formats. Like, no. You got to start rethinking about how some of these cards can interact with other cards and how they can apply to a board state. And like you say, how you can just throw them at someone's face rather than just, I want to take care of all the creatures on the board. So that to me was a particularly fascinating aspect of the cube for sure.
So can you tell us about, David, how this cube came to be? Like, what was the inception of the cube? When did this first start off?
Because you have a co-designer, is that correct?
Sorry?
A co-designer. Was this
yes.
a solo effort, or you have some co-designers?
Yes. So the beginnings of the Live the Dream Cube is when I was still working primarily with Magic Online, and I helped with the cubes feature there. I was like, I want to make my own cube on Magic Online, which I guess is a lot of people's dream in the past before Arena came around. And eventually, I convinced the powers that be that yes, you can make a cube, but your rules are you can't make it similar to the existing cubes that had in the client, which is generally format cubes like Modern, Legacy, Vintage Cube, or Holiday Cube as it was known then, and make it a business case, not just like, a 360 cards of commons, uncommons, because Adam Saborski already had an awesome Peasant Cube. So I had to find my own cube cube space to kind of own. And I had already secretly been working in the background for a Commander cube, because I love Commander. That's kind of been my kind of claim to fame, loving Commander, everything like that. But turns out not everybody wants to play Commander. Like if you have 4 Commander decks and 3 friends, you don't play Commander, maybe. But if you have 7 friends and a cube, you want to play cube.
You're lucky. If you've got,
you're lucky if you got 7 friends.
7 friends. Yeah, I don't have that. I have 7
I will just note that I have a similar problem with my pod, is that I usually don't get as many cube nights as I'd like, because a lot of times we have like 2, maybe 3 people, and then we're like, yeah, but we could just play cube. And I have a Brawl cube that I've just had to just put it on the shelf, and it never comes out, because every time I want to bring it out, they're just like, yeah, but we could just play Commander.
Exactly. So
Commander, right?
But you're not called, this isn't the Uber Bear Commander, it's Uber Bear Cube, right? So so in making this cube, I had a lot of constraints because Magic Online, I love the program, I love the team, it's awesome. It was designed in the past millennium, so I had a lot of restraints in the normal drafting rules, at least 540 cards available on the client, so I couldn't have any crazy Commander draft stipulations. Also, if you talk to a generic Magic player and you ask them, let's play cube, they're like, do you have any weird rules, like weird Commandery rules? You're like, no, it's just regular draft. So this cube had a lot of the same rules, but I wanted an experience that was very different from other cubes. For example, this is perhaps the exact opposite experience from Vintage Cube. Vintage Cube, you draft all the cards that cost 0 mana. You just want to end the game as quick as you can, and you want to have all the fun in the game. You want to play Black Lotus, Soul Ring, Planeswalker, or Plow Under, or whatever, so your opponent doesn't play the game at all. And as a game designer, I don't really like that. I think you can have a cumulative fun, and you can have more fun than 100% in a game of Magic. So I wanted a game where there were no feel-bads. You got to play every game. There's not land destruction, and you get to let some cards breathe from Magic that normally don't get to breathe in these high-powered cubes.
I think that's actually quite evident when you look at the list that, and we've always talked about finding the fun, right? It's kind of been a very common question that we've asked other cube designers, like, where is the fun in your cube? And it seems like the entire cube, this entire Live the Dream cube, everything is focused on fun. Everything is focused on fun interactions. The design space is very fun oriented, and you're not like looking to, zero sum the fun like you say that you are with the vintage cube, where it's like, no, I want to storm off on turn 2, or I want to put, Trinosphere out and stop you casting spells, etc., etc. Like I think that's why for me it was such a fun cube to play.
So when I was first looking over this cube, one of the first things that I was noticing, not only from your intro to the cube, but also from your previous spotlights, the changes between the seasons and whatnot, and more importantly, its current version, is that you have very optimized your curve to start playing Magic, quote unquote, around turn 3-ish. That's when things start hitting the board and being relevant, and it creates this interesting dynamic that a lot of cube environments don't really get to capitalize on, because, like you said, it is the antithesis of this vintage cube. It is the antithesis of, I'm just going to draft the best aggressive stuff. Well, you don't have the best aggressive stuff. Your plays are to pick the rocks or whatever so that we have building your mana base to eventually play your big stuff. It is a really unique experience that really captures the idea and that feeling of playing Commander, even though it's not Commander. And I think that it is a really clever way of forcing the mechanics there.
And when I played your cube, I remember Parnell, he just walked the dog with me because I didn't embrace the nature of what you're trying to do. I tried to spike your cube, and I tried to look for the lowest curving, efficient, and tried to flesh out some kind of like deep-seated aggro package, something that I thought I came in, full disclosure, I came in and I thought, it's not the break your cube attitude, but I wanted to test the limits of your cube and see if I could find something low to the ground, hyper aggressive, hand stripping, basically against the entire fundamental of what the cube's trying to do.
You wanted to have your fun.
I did.
You wanted your opponent
and
to
I
have their
got
fun.
the floor wiped with that strategy. I truly did. So I now have come to realize that is not your design goals. Acceptance has occurred, David. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so you bring up a few points. Chris Carrots, who is the executive producer of used to be Magic Land, but Arena, he does the exact same thing you do with any new environment, is try to play the lowest to the ground, aggressive, usually mono red of a flavor of some sort, to see if the cube has these cool, you're setting expectations, and these cool, weird expectations that go against the grain, but you just draft mono red and just flame everybody, you need to work on that. So I'm glad that you failed. I'm sorry that you failed, but that's kind of how things go.
Oh, no, don't be sorry.
Perhaps that was on me for not setting expectations correctly, but it sounds like I did because you knew
I
what the cube was
I was
about.
deliberate. I was deliberate in my breakage because I'm a cube curator, and I wanted to test your thresholds. I truly did. When I sat there, I had a mindset, kind of like Stu and I talked about. I don't know if you do this, David. No, I'll present the question to you in a second. But sometimes I don't come in and just I'm not the person that grabs the lands and just goes open lane. Sometimes I want to come in with intent while drafting. And I knew what your cube did. I was aware of it. I was excited to play it. I actually missed it in the first CubeCon, but I decided for whatever reason, I wanted to try the hyper efficiency plays. It wasn't to break it. It was just to see if I can get underneath all those people going for the big splash. And, Parnell's probably not the best example to test that on, truthfully.
He's really strong.
It may have had something to do with that. But
yeah, so this illustrates a really big thing, not just from cubes, but just game design and communication, actually, honestly, just setting expectations about the experience you're providing to players. Say, I bring this cube and I tell people nothing about it, and they open the pack and they see all these 6-7 mana spells, like, oh, I don't care about that, but they see, maybe some lower to the ground, like 3 mana, Fable of the Mirror Breaker before I took it out for being, turns out, too strong. They might just see, oh, I want to play the aggro deck in this big expensive cube. And their deck doesn't look great as an aggro deck, and the cubes, the environment shuts it out for just not being a thing you want to do. They're going to have a bad time. But if you set expectations and saying, this isn't a Savannah Alliance type cube, that any card whose purpose in the game of Magic the Gathering is purely to attack or block has been cut, then you can try to help lead people to having a more good time, because all we do are as game designers to try to get that needle that makes them feel good as they're engaging with your thing, and that's all I ever try to do.
So the closest one that I have to that's in, I guess, in parallel with your cube, and I'd like for you to check it out when we're together because I'd like some feedback on this. My two-headed giant cube. It plays very similar. It's got no land destruction, big splashy plays, goalless, spin the wheel type stuff, right? It doesn't even have like a sneak attack, but a sneak attack variant with some goofy nonsense. Like what's maybe what's the boar, the raised boar when it attacks the mono red one?
Yeah, Ilharg. Yeah.
I'm doing that type stuff in polymorph. So the closest I'm getting to your idea of that big, and you know what? I think it's a fan favorite. And so after seeing your cube in the wild, it gave me affirmations that mine has potential. But as a curator, you really open my eyes up to the bigger picture, I guess, literally, as in you can play spells that don't look hyper efficient on paper and they don't necessarily appease the spikes, but they have the potential to appease them because the spikes will, as we talked about in our previous episode, will come to the realization that your power levels, as May stated, started around 3 and kind of curve up from there. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
Spikes are going to find whatever is the most optimum in your environment of whatever lets them show off their skill the best.
Yeah, exactly.
And when it comes to this type of environment, when you can come in with that expectation of, I am not going to be seeing the most aggressive, most efficient 1-2 drop cards. All of my good cards start at 3. And when a spike is addressing that, they're more looking at what cards am I going to get the most amount of skill representation with. And I promise that I'm piggybacking in 2 point here. What's interesting about having such devoid early game is that you actively encourage these multicolored and I would almost say 5-color good stuff style decks of living the dream to get up to 5-color decks. Because usually in a normal environment, a lot of that lower curve keeps the mana kind of aggressive and it punishes decks for trying to be slower and trying to increase their fixing, their mana, whatever. And it's an interesting dynamic when you remove that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it is called the Live the Dream Cube, which I think I'm a better cube neighbor than designer, because I think the name is pretty good, honestly. And it's just, you see all these cards like, Nimbus, well, I guess not Nimbus Reborn, because that is a Pioneer deck, but like the Kami War and stuff. You see these cool 5-color cards that you don't really get to play ever because Magic just generally says you don't get that far because that's the game is set up a certain way. But this cube gives you that time to develop your mana and play these expensive cards because I want to give these cards a chance to shine. Like one thing I try to do as a game designer is let playing pieces be seen differently and let them be viewed with a different light than normally you would see otherwise. There are so many cards that don't get to see the light of day in Magic the Gathering because they're not made. Every card has an audience. And that audience isn't always standard grind or whatever. So you want to see live in Commander. And they don't get to see live in Commander that often because we make a lot of cards, and there's a lot of cards that come out. So just by the nature of having a Commander deck has 50 like non-land, non-mana sources in it, you don't get to see the light of day. And Live the Dream Cube lets you do that by giving people time to come online and play with these expensive spells. Now, from a business perspective, the matches take longer, the games take longer, which is like bad because you want people joining your event and stuff. But thankfully, I've never been told that you should make your games quicker so you can make more money. That's not really a thing that much. So thankfully, I've been given the reins to make whatever I think the coolest play environment is. And I think this is a unique take on Magic to let people play with these 6-mana, 4+ color bombs.
So I think if people want to play the super hyper fast environment, they're going to have that option, right? They have Vintage Cube. Vintage Cube exists. Not everybody is looking for that super optimum turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. Okay, I need to win. And I will say, I get a lot of fun out of that early setup. I get a lot of fun out of the turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 when I'm trying to fix mana and I'm trying to ramp a little bit and I'm trying to build on the utility and maybe put a utilitarian piece in there that's going to set me up for the long game, right? For turn, as May said, the turn 3 through 6 through 7 through 10 through however long the game lasts. And that's such a different dynamic that I love that that's the kind of option that you have, especially for Modo players, for anyone out there who doesn't have a group and doesn't have, a bunch of people to play Cube with. Now you've got like such a wonderful, difference in what's available to you. Either that Vintage Cube where everything is hyper fast and the Live the Dream Cube where you've just got that richness that comes through that early game.
So I have a question for you because I didn't get a chance to play your Cube in CubeCon number 1.
Womp womp.
Did you suffer from the same thing that I did with my Artifact Cube and other cubes I've designed, that 50-minute Swiss timer, as in getting those matches complete? Like, I know Stu and I, with my Artifact Cube, we were stacking blocks and putting pieces on there. Man, I was sweating to wipe him out in under like a minute and 13 seconds before the timer ticked out. I was not going to let this kid get a draw.
We were close at the end of that third game, yeah.
Yeah, thankfully with Cube, I don't have to worry too much about keeping gameplay under the 50-minute average round timer for competitive Magic, because this isn't a competitive Magic event, like format, generally. I didn't have too much. I didn't see a lot of people having trouble with time at CubeCon. A little bit, like for example, so funny story. One game was getting right to time, but that was with the player using Arcane Bombardment to try to spike time walks from the graveyard with like 8 other spells in it, and that was coming to time. But that had a huge crowd around it, and like they hit a time walk off of the Arcane Bombardment, and it was just everyone was cheering, and so like the one time it did go to time was kind of one of my favorite memories of the Cube.
So I have a couple more questions. So we've got this kind of punch list as we do before we get into the actual meat of the cube. But your removal suite, and I didn't include counter spells now because I'll ask that as a follow up. I count counter magic as a removal portion in my cubes, but I estimated about 10 to 12% of your premium, and it's got a combo of it's very light on mass removal. So a lot of things that enter the battlefield, creature-wise, stick, right? Is that a part of your design concept, is to let things thrive?
Well, so let me tell you a pillar of the cube. I wanted to play big splashy spells. No Savannah Lions, great. The blue mages over here salivating; they're not going to get attacked a lot. So when you make a cube for this philosophy, big blue decks, big blue, not like Thran Dynamo big blue decks, but decks that play expensive spells. This is where they thrive. And this is where green-white decks have a hard time surviving. To go back on my positive net fun, I don't have a card like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben in this cube because it's a cheap, aggressive creature that makes your opponent slow down, you can't do your plan, and have a bad time, and I'm going to attack you. This isn't a cube for that. Every other cube, basically, that we would feature is a home for Thalia. I played Thalia in as many cubes as she has styles like an arena, which is 25 or something. So this is a cube where green-white aggressive decks have a hard sell because blue and blue-red decks have the run of the roost. So to try to, there's a few knobs you can do. I don't like having anti-fun cards like Thalia or hand disruption, a lot of hand disruption, or slowing down things like green-white does. So I have to have green-white not have weaknesses elsewhere, which means stuff like not a lot of mass removal. So there's not a lot of Wrath of Gods, and a lot of the creatures are sticky, and they're maybe not so great at combat, but they will get a lot of advantage. For instance, there's a lot of planeswalkers in this cube, which I know is something to talk about later. Planeswalkers both are removal and sticky threats for the blue, spell decks, and give you decision making and lots of points of agency in determining what you do in the mid-range soupy slogfest that this cube can become a lot of.
May, would you mind covering at the very top of this the archetype?
I think it's interesting that over time, how much that your guilds and your intended archetypes have kind of shifted between your seasons from what I've read from your previous spotlights and your current version. And it is interesting to see a lot of these older ideas shift into something completely different, like Rakdos starting off as like discard. And remind me what it is now.
So Rakdos started off as so in the early days, I wanted everything to do something unique that like other cubes generally didn't do. So green-white was clone tokens, and that you could play stuff like Echo Chamber, I think, and like stuff that made copies of existing creatures, and then you populated them. And black-red at the time was discarding cards for me is good, and you drawing cards is bad. So I had stuff like Fate Raveler that says whenever opponent draws a card, they lose a life. And I had Madness cards so that you wanted to discard cards to like kind of make it. Oh, Wheel of Fortune is actually good in this cube, and not in a cube where you're just testing power and mana rocks and stuff and getting it out. So every theme had a weird backwards thing. So yes, at the beginning, Rakdos was self-discard because I couldn't quite make the opponent's drawing cards being bad for them good. I think now maybe you could because we made a lot more cards in that space. But now Rakdos has sort of sacrificed, but not in the terms of like Nantuko or Blood Artist sacrifice, but stuff like threatens, and Sauron the Lidless Eye lets you threaten things, and then you can sacrifice things to your Falconwrath Aristocrat and stuff like that. But one thing that I have learned in doing, I've also kind of been cheating in the fact that I've had a lot of play testing with this cube. This cube is probably, the 8th most drafted cube in Magic the Gathering overall in the history of the game. And
It's
that's
easy
like,
when you have a lot of data.
it's really easy. So I feel pretty privileged in that I get this data. What I have learned that the more you have things on Rails, the more you can prescribe a specific draft environment. But living the dream is kind of more of a philosophy on how to play Magic, and not like, blue has to be copy time walks and green black has to be planeswalkers or graveyard matters. Just having the cards kind of tilt you in one direction, but not be the only prescription for that. That kind of lets the cube really live nowadays with all the iterations I've had through the seasons on Magic Online.
So there's a reason that I specifically wanted to notate about Rakdos, is that I think it's interesting with a lot of your archetype packages over time, they've kind of, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, I promise I don't, but they've kind of normalized into archetypes that we see a lot in the color pie, like Azorius, and like kind of curved into Blink over time, and Rakdos became that steel sacrifice thing, and it's kind of aristocrats in a way, but
It definitely is.
It's an interesting development, and I was kind of curious about, do you feel like that as more cards get pushed in current sets, do you feel like that it pushes you more towards those commonplace directions, or is it just a matter of data and good feels?
I think May just wants a green-red fairy. That's what she's chasing here, is a green-red fairy.
Go. Yeah, so that's a really good question. And the weirdo archetypes was one of my many experiences with this cube. Anytime I run an event or something, I always do a lot of experiments. Experiments with this cube where can like a big coffee time walk cube even exist? Can specific archetypes like Rakdos self-discard, then draw, can that exist? And can specific cards exist? Like, for example, David White, the co-creator of the first version, and I've been working with him throughout the years of the Live the Dream cube. He's a fan of Mirror March. That's like his favorite card ever. And can that live in a cube? Can that live in a cube with a bunch of legendary creatures? Because when you put creatures into play, you maybe make copies of them based on the coin flipping. So I run experiments all the time. The experiments with the weirdo archetypes, I tried it, and I learned that the more unique cards we make that still point to a regular archetype like Rakdos kind of sacrifice, that's a live the dream philosophy, and players will always tend that way. So if I have this weird black-red, toil and trouble that makes maybe you target your opponent for them to draw cards, and opponents drawing cards, that's terrible. Players are adverse to that because it's kind of weird. But if you give them, here's a black-red card that's more good stuff and kind of has some hooks for self-sacrifice, they're more likely to lean into that type of play. And I can't force players to draft the things I want them to do. They're going to draft the things that they think will give them the most fun or enjoyment or chance to win or whatever drives that particular player.
Yeah, okay. I agree with that. You can't bring the horse to water. We've experienced that. I've got a good friend of ours, Avram, that we're going to talk about on a future episode. He's got kind of a color-shifted cube. And so, in that one, that idea, red is your control mechanism, green is your kill spells with fight. And the struggle with that design is you have to announce that early on. They have to have no choice, because if you put some other, I think Sam Black talked about this before, if you put something, let's say a divination versus a ponder, you can never make a player draft a divination. I mean, they're always going to take the ponder. It's because it's the immediacy. They understand what it is. It's the familiarity. It's that nice warm bowl of chili on that cold winter's day. They're always going to do that. So if you wanted to take something and color shift it or try to break the pie, I can see the problems with getting players to want to follow that lead.
I think, especially with Cube, like a lot of enfranchised players are really, like, Cube is such a passion for them. And I will say for me, it's going to take quite something to break my mind away from Azorius is control and green is aggro, and again the black is the sacrifice and the aristocrats and the red is the burn. Like, that's so deeply embedded in my brain when I think about Magic, that something that shifts away from that, I'm not going to think about that when I'm drafting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think your point, Bear, I'm going to call you Bear.
You call me Bear.
Mr.
Bear,
Adams, so your point about the color-shifted cube, I think, again, like most things, problems are created and solved by communication. If you're communicating and setting expectations that this is the color-shifted cube, blue is aggro, red is control, stuff like that, people can kind of keep that in their mind as they're playing. when you draft a Live the Dream Cube and it's big splashy commander, does that communicate that red-black is opponents drawing cards and you discarding cards? Not really. So, it's about setting expectations to your players as the kind of environment they're jumping into. So that's why I feel like my weirdo archetypes thing I started with wasn't a great home for Live the Dream Cube because it wasn't a weirdo archetype cube. It was, magical Christmas light.
I'm going to put you on the spot, David. What is your...
I'm here.
And as long as you have to promise me the other cards in your cube can't hear you right now.
Yeah.
What is your favorite
Yeah.
card in your cube? And make sure the cube can't hear you.
I wish it had new art, but I really like Blaster Genius. That's a card I used to cosplay as Rolzeric way back when I had, lots of black and white hair. And I love that card because it can win the game. Like, you don't see it very often. It can win. So Blaster Genius is a 6-mana blue-red sorcery that you draw 3 cards and then you discard a card and you shoot something equal to how expensive the card you discarded is. So, on the surface, you kind of draw 3 cards and kill a creature. Yeah, it's kind of like a 3-for-1 sort of, but you can, like, I have used it to kill players by discarding Emrakul. I've used it by discarding the aforementioned Blasphemous Act, deal 9 to them. I've dealt 15 to them with a Fire Emancipation in play, discarding a 5-mana card. I've discarded a 10-mana blue card. Like, I've discarded Mnemonic Deluge to it, so the next turn I can flash it back with it in the graveyard with, some card, Mizzix's Mastery or whatever. So it does so many unique things, but it's not a very strong card, but it's the kind of the card that's gold. So it encapsulates kind of what the cube is about. You're going to look at it, you're like, oh, that's kind of a weird card. I don't know if it's that good. And then you'll lose to it, like, later in the day. You're like, wow, I never thought it could do that. And that's kind of what the Cube is all about.
May, you got any thoughts on that? Because I think I can see your gears are turning there.
Or a favorite card. We can go around the table for the favorite card because I know I have one.
Go ahead. Let's go ahead and do it. We're just doing it.
Mate, tell us.
Now May's on the spot.
Yeah. We like to do
You preface with putting me on the spot, you didn't?
Yeah.
Well, I was sitting here thinking about it because I knew I was going to be put on the spot. It was the classic teacher situation where it's like, oh, yeah, I don't think this person's paying attention. Oh, we better call on this one student. And they're like, wait, what? I was actually paying attention because I was looking up specifically Hydroid Krasis. Why? Because it's just always a big splashy dumb card that does things, draws me cards in Simic, and I like it.
I love it. I'll go ahead and jump into mine. It's Mark Folio's Sulphurous Springs, and it's got nothing to do with the fact. It's just I want to be that little devil someday, retired, sitting. Yep. You guys can't see David; he's doing the pose. It is literally the most chill. Like, I have retired. I have achieved all my life goals. I have lived the dream, and now I'm just boiling myself. How about you, Stu?
All right. So mine, and I may be a little biased towards this because...
Interesting.
When we drafted this cube in Richmond, I had a very, very specific strategy for drafting, and it was odd CMC, and that's it. And so Yennet Cryptic Sovereign. So 2 colorless, white, blue, black, flying, vigilance, menace, legendary creature Sphinx. Whenever Yennet Cryptic Sovereign attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If that card's CMC is odd, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Otherwise, draw a card. So that to me was just... Obviously, that screams very, very Commander, very EDH-centric, but I don't have a Yennet deck, so I wanted to play it. And getting to put an Emrakul the Promised End onto the battlefield, I believe at least twice from this card was that made my year right there. If I did nothing else fun for the entire year, that was enough for me. That was incredible.
So, David, is this really benchmark what you're trying to do with this environment?
I mean, so it's funny you have 3 different examples of cards. One, and then you have just a land. Okay, well, great. I mean, lands cast spells. So that's good.
The devil
and then
in the pool.
I understand.
Specifically.
Yeah, you did mention the
I
devil.
let my Timmy out of the bag for a minute. It's fine.
And then May, you have Hydroid Krasis, which Hydroid Krasis is a known quantity for like enfranchised Magic players. They live with that standard or what have you, or maybe a little bit in Pioneer, especially with the aforementioned Visit. And it's a run-of-the-mill example of a cube card. Like, you cast it for X equals 10 and draw 6 cards or whatever, or 5. And then, or you can maybe just cast it for 4 mana and you cantrip, but like it can do crazy things. So that's a cool thing. And then Stu, you have like what I'm trying to go for with the cube is a weird, you only see it in Commander, build around that has really high ceilings. So that brings me to another topic is this floor is this cube has lowest floors, but really high ceilings. I care a lot about the ceilings of this cube. And as long as the floor is good enough, I want the ceiling to be high, as opposed to regular Magic where you want your cards to be dependable, you want your lightning bolt to be a lightning bolt, you want your creatures to attack and block, you want them to do what they say all the time. This isn't that kind of cube. This is a, but what if, magical Crystallis land. And yeah, unit flipping Emrakul is exactly what I built the cube to do.
That was my magical Christmas land. As soon as I see that, I think I want to, and then I think I might have even got Emrakul the next pack, and I'm like, right, that's it. No even CMC in the entire of this deck that I'm drafting. I want to flip that card. It happened twice. I was very happy. All right.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you had a good time, yeah.
I certainly did. So, Reanimator, very common theme, very common archetype, right? Exists in a bunch of different cubes so this is obviously already the big creature spells, but tell us about this Reanimator package that you've got built in and how this kind of works with these big splashy creatures that you've obviously got in this cube.
Yeah, so when you think of Reanimator from Magic the Gathering, you probably think of Entomb, Animate Dead, Reanimate, Necromancy, maybe Buried Alive or something like that. The Reanimator is a combo general thing that you reanimate a creature in turn 3 or something, and you've reanimated a Grizzlebrand or now a Traxa or whatever, and you just win the game. This cube has a pretty strong philosophy of no instant win 2-card combos, at least in the mid game. I think I have one infinite combo that I know about, and it's Astral Dragon and Chaos Mirror. If that's the name of the card, I should know the card names. So, Cursed Mirror, that's what it was. So that is an infinite combo, but I don't like those infinite combos in the game immediately. So this game, Reanimator, isn't really a combo deck, but more of an engine where it's a mid-game. I cheat the mana by like 3 or 4 mana, and I can get a creature out a few turns beforehand. And if it dies, don't worry, it's probably coming back, like with Burial Rites or Spirit Sister's Call, which I think I could because nobody would play with the card I designed. I felt really bad about it. But like that's kind of how this cube treats Reanimator, and it's not a not a turn 3 combo, but a mid-range, let me just grind you out with graveyard synergies thing.
Yeah, stuff like, was it Yawgmoth's Vial?
Bargain.
Yeah, stuff like that.
An Archon of Cruelty is in there, so if I look at this, if I see that early on, I'm thinking, right, that is a huge signpost to me, and maybe I'm not quite as much interested in the fun that day, and I've just had a bad day at work, and I just want to smash face with something super efficient. I'm grabbing me an Archon of Cruelty, which I think is right up there with Atraxa as like the primo Reanimator strategy, target. So, but it's cool. And obviously you're still getting you're still getting all the, the ETB value, all that kind of stuff. But, how does that contribute to sort of, and I think I'll move into like the big games, right? Because again, we talked about this whole EDH kind of experience, right? So I feel like Reanimator, if you look at it in a vintage cube, it really does threaten to bring the game like almost immediately to a standstill, right? You get an Archon down early, even you get a Griselbrand down early. You're just that really does compact the game so significantly, but you're trying to do something different with your Reanimate package. I'm assuming that's what you're doing, right? You're trying to sort of expand on it a little bit rather than it just being an end game strategy.
Exactly. And, Reanimator in this cube, for instance, the Archon of Cruelty, which I do agree with you that it's probably the strongest reanimation target, half the time you just cast the darn thing. It's 8 mana, whereas in other cubes, that's kind of like 6 mana. So, yes, it's your top end, but, you play an Empowered Auto-Generator on turn 3, or you play like, a Gilded Lotus or a Timeless Lotus, and you just cast that sucker on turn 5 or something, and it's out there. I also would hazard a guess that this is the cube where you would still win with an opponent putting Archon of Cruelty on the battlefield the most out of any cube. Because, you sacrifice a creature, you might not even have one. They draw a card, who cares? You're drawing cards tons of times. They gain 3 life, that doesn't matter. And you can do your own thing and have your own engine. And that is another goal of this cube, is to try to lose while having the most fun. I want people to lose, but be like, oh, that was cool, and feel good as they lose, to try to have more net fun with every game.
So I kind of want to revisit just for a moment, and it's more of a plug for a good friend, but it was regarding the infinite combos, and I wasn't certain that, David, you were familiar with it, but it is the Commander Spellbook, the site, and it has Find My Combos, so you can export your CSV out. I was just itching to pull out and export out your cube and run it through there to see if it found some infinite combos. And ChillMTG, a good friend of ours, good friend of the show, he actually has a video on how to use this tool, but it's absolutely fantastic, and it'll help you. If you're a person that does not want infinite combos, it's amazing. And if you're a person that wants to complete them by adding 1 or 2 pieces, it'll tell you which ones. It'll give you the roadmap and explain to you how the combo works. But I wanted to kind of put that in there too. I was interested to see how many, in fact, infinite combos you potentially have in this cube.
Sounds like an excellent resource. I also have a card. I also bet it wouldn't pick up on some things like Star of Extinction and Toralf, God of Fury, or Boris Reckoner. That's not an infinite combo, but it is a 2-card combo, probably win the game, that I have steered away a little bit from. But like, I think there still exists a Toralf and a Star of Extinction. But stuff like that, yeah, I definitely don't want combos like that in the cube. So thank you for the Commander's Spellbook recommendation.
So I'm going to hit you with a curveball completely off script because that's just what I do here.
There's a script? I'm just answering the questions you tell me. I don't know.
Following it religiously. Can't
I revealed our secrets. Anyways, speaking of powerful creatures that you want to get into play, I think it's interesting that while you're trying to emulate the feeling of a Commander gameplay experience, there's a lot of cards that you can't get in Commander that you can play in this environment that kind of scratches that Commander itch, but you're never going to get them in Commander. So this is where we have things like Lutri, like Primetime, Primeval Titan, and whatnot. And I think it's really interesting, a lot of those decisions that you put in for these cards. And when it comes to fitting your design goals, what made you come to the decision or the resolution that you wanted to include these cards?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, despite not being on the script. I am a Lutri stan. I remember when that card, I saw that card being designed, I'm like, it's a blue-red elemental otter, I'm in. But, you know, Companions had a lot of goals with them, and one of those goals, sadly, didn't really work with Commander. So this is kind of like my chance to let that otter see more play and have it in a cube like this. I was really worried that, you know, everyone looks at Lutri, oh, you can play it in any deck. Wouldn't that just be too strong for the cube? And so I didn't have it, I think, for the first 2 seasons of the Live the Dream Cube on Magic Online. But then for the third one, I'm like, you know what? I get one more run. Let's try, baby. And it was, you know, drafted like around pick 6 or so, which is pretty good. So I was justified in that it can live in cubes like this, which is why you see a lot of arena cubes now, because, you know, the Dream Cube crawled so the Chromatic Cube could walk or whatever. And then another secret goal with the Live the Dream Cube is that every card in Magic is somebody's favorite Magic the Gathering card. Some have way more favorites, like, you know, Jason Mind Sculptor, Lightning Bolt. Some don't have a lot of favorites, but people still love them. And when I saw a card that has people's favorite, that I know is a lot of people's favorite cards, I want to put in the cube. I want people to feel good when drafting, when looking at their deck, and when playing, and especially when losing. And, you know, if you lose to your favorite card, like if I lose to someone casting Lutri, I'm like, nice job, Lutri, you did it. So I want to include all these cards like Primeval Titan that people love seeing and love playing, but can't really play it in a lot of places. And this is kind of give them their area to shine.
I love that, because this has got one of my newest, like, babies of Magic. And
Evil.
Oh my gosh, I love this card. So, and I'm gonna tell it because I fanboy over this card like crazy.
Evil.
It's Toxrill, the Corrosive, 5 colorless, 2 black. At the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token, and then you can play blue-black, sacrifice a slug, draw a card. So much text. So much awesomeness. It's awesomeness. All right. I cannot explain how much I love this. And I have this art as well. So this is why I'm fanboying about this card. It's incredible. So yes, you have my favorite card in your cube. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. I'm glad to hear. And yeah, so like I said before, our job as game designers is to evoke feelings in players. Hopefully these feelings align with their motivation to playing your thing. But I try to have both cards that are a lot of people's favorites, like Toxrill the Corrosive, which is just a black Elesh Norn, or maybe Elesh Norn is the white Toxrill the Corrosive. But I also want to include cards that give people strong feelings. For example, there's Zero the Golden Sting. She's a Jund commander from Dominaria, commander that is a Jund 3/3 flyer. Anyway, the important thing is she makes tokens. And the tokens of this card is a little Victorian-like boy ready for school. And he's got like a horse, like a unicorn behind him, but he's a bug, like his head is like an ant. And people look at that token and they get a feeling. They get invoked feelings of, what is this? This is weird, or this is cool, or like, it's a memory they'll remember. So I have cards like that. Now, you might notice, but David, Zero isn't in the cube. That's correct, because I playtested her about 7 times, tried drafting her many times. It didn't work for the cube, but I still give it a chance because I wanted to try out cards that maybe people feel things like Zero. So thanks for liking Toxtrol, I guess.
Love it.
Insects and slugs are in, I suppose.
Love it.
So what frequency do you actually update this cube? Because I witnessed you I don't know if you were foiling out while sitting to the right of me, but I watched you with just a pocket full of cards, just swapping them out like nobody's business live. And it made me bode the question, like, to what frequency? Are you a spontaneous, like, ooh, I want this card? Or are you just trying to foil it out? Or what's your level of frequency? I guess rollover sets, etc.?
Yeah, so I do try to foil it out. I have a list of all the cards and their final evolution of what I want them to be. And I think I'm 5 cards away now from everything being the exact version I want them to be. So that's a whole other topic, is like the experience of drafting. There's more to drafting than just the names of the cards you draft in the packs. But to answer your other question is I update this once every new set drop. So, I think Commander Masters just came out, and I did update the cube. You won't see those reflections in Cube Cobra, but I changed out the cards based on the new art I want. Like, I like the new Factor Fiction, because like Richard Kane Ferguson did one, so I basically have to have that art as the
I'm slamming
fiction.
it in my cube.
Yeah, by definition. Then I have the new profile arts for like Melser Wander, Yuriko, Tatiova and stuff like that. So I update it with every set. And then, sometimes David White or somebody will message me, or, Derek Gallen, and be like, hey, have you thought about this card in the cube? I'll look at it and be like, I did, but I think I was wrong then. So yeah, let's do it now. But everybody is so loves to put this card in the cube, but what do you cut? Like that's always the thing. And I run a tight ship, keep it at 540, but I update it once a set. But for instance, I ordered a Draining Well. I know card names because I think that would be an excellent addition to the cube. So right now I'm looking at, cards to cut. So, if you all want to look at cards and decide a card that you 3 of the Uber Bear podcast want to cut, I'm happy to cut that card.
Cube,
and put it
they're gonna literally fire me after this.
I'm gonna hit you with that hard curveball that I've been.
The Uber Cube podcast. But I'm okay with the Uber Bear podcast. We just going to make that formal now, guys. Sorry,
Listen, what we're formalizing the Uber Cube podcast.
Uber Cube podcast.
Uber
yeah,
Cube
that was my
podcast
mistake.
With May, Stu, and Bear. That's how it is from now.
Just Bear.
All right. So I also want to ask. This is something that I discuss quite frequently when we're talking about. We've talked about this on tons of other episodes when we've discussed cubes with other curators. Is about the signposts in the cube, right? Cards that stick out, that are very much a case of, if you see this card, there's going to be an avenue here. There's something that's going to stick out in this cube. There's going to be a draft experience. There's going to be an alley that you should look towards when looking at this, right? So one we have in the show notes is Lurrus, right? So companion card, black and white. You get to cast off from your graveyard once a turn. What to you sticks out as the most significant or the most fun, whatever you want to talk about, signposts in the Live the Dream cube?
Yeah. So first off, Lurrus isn't a black and white card. It is hybrid. It is black or white.
Black or white, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I actually think of hybrid cards differently. They're not gold cards. They're in fact the opposite of gold cards when you compare them against monocolored cards. But we can talk about Lurrus later because I love talking about it. So when it comes to signpost cards, I think my probably favorite one, is that the question? The favorite signpost cards, or how I think about them?
Yeah, what was your decisions for the one, like, obviously, first of all, do you have those? I would assume that they're in your cube, right? You're going to have those signpost cards that represent the archetypes at some kind of level, right? And then why are they in there? What was the decision-making process when you were putting those signpost cards in the cube, and how do they represent the archetypes that you want to sort of push the players towards, if you will?
Like Ephemerate screams blink. I mean, I'm looking at that. I put that on the list.
Yeah.
That type stuff. So to clarify the question.
Yeah. So signpost cards are generally 2-colored gold cards that tell people this specific archetype is doing this thing. Like Ephemerate is white, so it definitely points toward blink, but also just a protection spell. They try to doomblade your creature. Nope, Ephemerate, sorry. It also is a prowess, spells matter card. It does all kinds of crazy things. Maybe you can tutor for it with a card that looks for cheap instant sorceries. But when it comes to 2-color gold signpost cards, at the beginning of the cube, I had a rule that every 2-color gold card had to point to that archetype. So, for example, blue-white, everything had to be blink. You had to be Vincer the Sojourner, or Cloud Blazer, or Elite Guard Mage, or Braga, or all these cards that we're used to seeing in all these different cubes. Then, just because then that changed the rule to be not every card has to point toward that archetype, but that it can't go against the archetype. It can't say explicitly blue-white is, a control color, and it says you only can have one creature in play and cast one spell a turn or something like that. I don't know, I'm kind of making things up. But as long as the color pair doesn't go against what the color pair is trying to do, then it's in. Like, for instance, red-green, in every version, red-green has always been big creatures, because that's kind of what green does in a lot of formats, is large spells. And in this format, creatures. For example, I have Doors of Durin now. It's a 5-mana artifact that whenever you tag, you can scry 2. And if the top card is a creature, you're going to put it into play, tapped and attacking for free. So that's a perfect example of another name for this cube is they spin the will cube. We also have We've Got a Reader cube. So there's lots of different fun names for this cube. And Doors of Durin is a perfect example of a card that illuminates what red-green is about, but also maybe you don't have tons of big creatures. It still lets you scry whenever you attack, which is like not nothing, but it's something. It's not something like in the first version of the cube, black-white was life gain. And then there's the black enchantment that says whenever you gain life, an opponent loses that much life. And that card is only for life gain strategies. It's not for anything else. And when it came down to it, the only people who wanted that card were black-white life gain players. And even then, maybe people are playing a black-white deck, but not playing life gain. So no one is drafting that card. It's not up for contention. There aren't decisions making when drafting that card. And nobody in the pod wants that card. And when you have cards in pods that nobody wants a large majority of time, they probably shouldn't be in the queue to begin with.
So you actually, before when we kind of talked about favorite cards, and this is a little bit of a delayed response, but Stu just so happened to pull up your Cube Cobra list, and I'm looking through it and I'm perusing.
I've been looking through this
and
for
I have found
6 months.
One of my favorites that really, it's funny because this actually cross-pollinates into the higher vintage-powered cubes, but simultaneously is, in fact, Live the Dream, and it's Fallen Shinobi. For 3 colorless and Dimir, you get a creature zombie ninjutsu. For 2 colorless and Dimir, you can return an unblocked attacker you control. Everybody knows what ninjutsu does. But whenever Fallen Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top 2 cards of their library. Until the end of the turn, you may play those cards without paying their mana cost. This card is interesting and devastating in this cube. It screams I wish I had drafted this the first time, because I could see because you've got these big, huge, splashy air ties and stuff like that. This card gets some in this cube. I love this choice.
Yeah, it's good you point that one out, because blue-black's archetype has always been play your opponent's cards. In a cube that wants to promote big, splashy, dynamic gameplay that always changes based on what game you're playing your opponent's cards is a fun way to make each game feel different from the previous one. Now, I'm glad you pointed out Fallen Shinobi, because Fallen Shinobi is a power outlier for this cube. A lot of cube designers' goals to have a narrow power band, which makes sense, right? If I see Lightning Bolt and then I see Shock in the same pack, I'm like, what's going on here? There's no decision making here. I know one card is strictly stronger. Your cube will always have power outliers, no matter how hard you try. I tried very hard to have this cube have a narrow power band, but because Fallen Shinobi does such a strong Live the Dream experience, it's kind of random. You have a build around, it's powerful, you play your opponent's spells, it works better with big expensive spells. I think it fits in this cube because it does exactly what the cube wants to do. And blue-black kind of has a evasive creature saboteur, hit you, do cool triggers theme that it's going to be in the cube forever, despite being stronger than most other cubes, most of the cards in the cube. And that's for the player to identify after they've drafted it a few times.
So what about
Live the
you as a
dream of hitting somebody with a shinobi and revealing a Natali.
and then record
Exactly. Yeah.
So how conscious were you, right? Because obviously you work for Wizards of the Coast, right? You should be, I would imagine, somewhat knowledgeable of Magic and the cards that are out there and power levels and that. Probably pretty much so. So how conscious were you when looking at Fallen Shinobi, which is Dimir, compared to the other, and not even the top end, but the power outliers? Because I think there's an important distinction there between the top end and the power outliers. And yes, you can say that they coexist in a similar space. But how conscious were you when you're looking at that cube, as we've called it numerous times, from that 40,000 feet view, when you're looking at the whole thing, comparing this to the other color pairs and the other whatever other archetypes and the other gold cards that are out there, how conscious were you and how conscious still are you of the tightness, like you say, of that power band, of that power level that they need to exist in order to sort of manage, if you will, the draft experience and the power level of the cube?
Yeah, so there are many employees that work for Wizards of the Coast, and we hire people based on how good they are at their job, not based on how knowledgeable they are about Magic, unless it's their explicit job to be knowledgeable about Magic, which is rather a small percentage when it comes down to running a game as big as Magic, D&D, card, Duel Masters, stuff like that. So some cubes, the designer explicitly says some parts of it are stronger than others. Like Andrea Mengucci's Awesome Vintage Cube. He's like, yeah, blue is just better than the other colors. That's how it's going to be. That's Magic. I'm setting expectations, which is brilliant. That's what you want to do. When it comes to stronger cards like Fallen Shinobi, I try my best to have other colors be on par with it, but that will not always be the case. One trouble I have is green-white in this cube is generally not as strong as other color pairs than blue-red. That's just how it's going to be. Have I won drafts where I've drafted? Like, I played once with Dan of Devoid Cube fame, and we were playing a green-white mirror match in the finals of a cube draft I drafted with 6 other cube luminaries, and there was a green-white mirror match at the end, and it was awesome. Because of the self-correcting nature of drafting, sometimes you can have color pairs that are stronger still be in a functional cube than you would otherwise. For example, AFR Limited, black-red was really strong, and blue was not very good. But if you've got 6 people drafting black-red, the one blue drafter is going to have a strong deck because no one else was playing blue. And that's kind of the self-correcting nature that I've meant to lean in with the cube. Of course, every chance I get, I try to have green-white to be as strong as the black. I think Arwen Mortal Queen from Lord of the Rings is a really good contender for a card that can be strong like Fallen Shinobi. But it is good to know that cards like Fallen Shinobi exist in the cube, so you can sort of play around it. Because you can play around in Fallen Shinobi. I've seen people do it, and they have won the game because they've played around it. And still having play skill involved, it's not just, 4 mana, kill you, I win. It's like I have to add board presence and play around it. That still, I think, lets the cube, the card still exist in the environment, even when it is blending between power layer and power topping.
So, May, tell us about Luris.
Okay, so it has been bugging me since I've been looking at the cube, your goal design, whatever. And to be clear, I love the companions in this environment. I think that they serve a perfect flavor function, and they bring in the mechanical aspect that you're trying to create, the live the dream moments of, I'm going to build my companion deck. It's like I'm making my own commander deck, but in draft. I love that. That's perfect. That's on flavor. Luris itself normally would be a power outlier for a lot of environments because they just have so many cards at 1 and 2 that Luris can take advantage of, even without the eggs, even without the baubles, whatever. Luris can still just generate a lot of value just because the density is so high. But in this environment, specifically, I want to say I would cut it because it gave false signal. When I look at this card and I see it in a pack, I think, oh, what am I possibly going to bring back from my graveyard that I care about? I would have to be in some kind of a mill strategy, maybe bring back rocks. And there's just not enough cards that really makes Luris purr in your environment. And I feel like that taking a card like Luris and only playing it, it's a 3-2 with lifelink does not feel very good. So
yes,
that is my reason why I would cut it. It's underpowered for your environment. It's undersupported for your environment. It's a bad signal.
Yeah, you give really good points. And Luris has been on the chopping block for a while. Back when Black-White was more life gain, it kind of had another hook, which I think justified it. Black-White no longer does life gain. So, Luris is definitely on the fringe. I have a friend, his name is Michael Bolin, and he loves drafting Luris in everything ever made. And so whenever he sees a Luris, he drafts around it no matter what.
And I'm like, feline.
Exactly. And this is probably I would say this is one of the worst cubes that Luris could be in. It's not built around 1 and 2 drops. That's just how it goes.
And I want to point out, I in fact drafted Luris. That was one of the that was pretty much my pack 1 pick 1. Is whenever I was going to do Break the Dream Cube. That's what I actually chased. I chased that Anthony's. Yep. It didn't work out.
So I think this leads into a larger topic is like misleading your players and trapping them in a false sense of you try to draft around this thing, but it doesn't exist. Haha, I got you. And that's not very fun. No one wants to get got. So Luris does sort of do that. It's also similar to Urza, Lord High Artificer. It's a 4 mana 1/4 that it creates an artifact. It lets you tap artifacts for mana, and then you can 5 mana, shuffle your deck, cast a top card. I have played this before, and I haven't gotten the feedback that says, David, I drafted Urza, but I didn't see any other artifact matters cards. I saw a couple artifacts, but they mostly added mana, so Urza doesn't really affect that. Why is Urza in your cube? And I feel like I may have misled players in there. Urza's not in there for the artifact mana generations. It's in there for the temporal aperture, spin the wheel, cast a top card, which this cube it's awesome at. So there's a fine line between misleading your players and having unique draft synergies that maybe they wouldn't see. And I might cut Lurrus from this cube. I also just like looking at the new version of Lurrus a lot. It looks really pretty. So like
I wouldn't suggest a cut without a replacement. And I happen to have one. Sarah Paragon.
Did you see the blog for this cube where I cut Sarah Paragon like a month ago for the newest cards?
I don't think I saw that specific note about Sarah Paragon, but I think that you should put it back.
You're not familiar with all 500 blog pages of changes I made to the cube? How dare you? Sarah Paragon was in here for the longest time. Every time I saw Sarah Paragon, it was 4 mana player, can't bring anything back, and then she dies to something. Despite being 1 more mana value, you can bring back things that cost 3 or less.
She brings back lands.
Look, she brings back Lurrus. Yeah, she brings back, the 12 fetch lands in the game, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, she was in the queue for the longest time, but I just cut her. But maybe I have to change out Lurrus. Yeah, I mean, I gave her a try, but I can give her more tries. So I'll put her in. I'll put her in for CubeCon, and then we'll see how it goes. And if Sarah Paragon does the job, then you change the queue for the better.
And swinging back and forth as we do here on the podcast, we have a script, right? It's supposed to be step 1, step 2, and then step 47, then go back to 3.
It never works out like that.
But I write it anyways. So we're talking about the Selesnya section, and I had a suggestion for you that I kind of bypassed. I glanced over that I added to my power cube today. And let me kind of step back. I have a powered vintage 540, and I am trying to, even though I'm running the powered 9 and all the things, I'm trying to embrace the fun and slowly migrating towards cards that are more interesting, more dynamic, less oppressive, as we do stacks and all that. But this card I wanted to point out for Selesnya was Cosmic Rebirth. For 1 colorless and Selesnya, instant, choose target permanent in your graveyard. If it has a mana value 3 or less, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand, you gain 3 life. I thought this card might have a vibe for the Live the Dream too, as I was actually slotting it in today in my cube, and I was just pondering. And what do you think about that one, David?
Yeah, so Cosmic Rebirth, I think, hits the power level of a cube like this. It has a floor that is acceptable. The ceiling isn't very exciting for the cube. A lot of times Cosmic Rebirth will bring back another value creature or stuff like that. And this cube doesn't have tons of 3 mana or less cards that you'd want to expend a whole card on to bring it back. Also, the life gain in this cube matters the least. This cube is the cube where, aggro is less of a thing, so life total is less of a thing. Another example is battles are really strong in this cube because you don't care that much about the opponent gaining the 5 or 7 life that you would need to flip a battle that has 5, counters on it. So I did think about Cosmic Rebirth. Also, when you look at Cosmic, when I put gold cards especially, I want to put gold cards in that people might be one of those colors and think about, so now you do that, the car veering off on the off-ramp on that meme, like, do I change, do I pivot? And Cosmic Rebirth doesn't strike me as a card that excites people to take that quick off-ramp. But it was a card I thought about for the cube.
It's very utilitarian.
Cool card,
so
though.
I'm kind of thinking of like that supplemental. I guess I was thinking of the not so much like I do the same thing you do in all my cubes is that my gold section traditionally is signpost, but also I take advantage of like utility components too for those, I guess the Ginny Johnnies that want to get the engines going so that they've either discarded this card and they want to, regrowth it back type effects, stuff like that. So they can live the dream again and get the splash again. That's kind of where my headspace is.
I think I'd rather have a less restrictive card to bring a card back from the graveyard. Again, like you said, if the life gain doesn't really matter and you've got the opportunity to bring something back, if it's to your hand, okay. If it's just a better, more fun card to play, obviously the 3 CMC or less is nice and you get to stick it right on the battlefield. Yeah. So that's cool and all, but Is it as fun as being able to bring like a 7 or 8 mana card to your hand and be able to cast it again?
It's definitely not.
Maybe not.
It's not the splash zone at
It's not
SeaWorld.
splash, it's not
I get
as fun.
that. Yeah. So
So
it
let's-
kind of segues. That segues perfectly. You talked about battles. Stu, take it away.
Yeah, so let's move into the 5 color, the big splash. So like you said, the 4 and 5 mana decks, this is where the cube exists, right? This is where, there's availability of that. And there's a couple of other points that I'll make as far as those colors are concerned. But I want to first talk about a card that when I first saw this, I thought it was bonkers. Anthony was less impressed, okay? And it's Invasion of Alara. It's a Wooburg battle. When it enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile 2 non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You may cast one of those cards without paying its mana cost, put one of them into your hand, then put the other cards exiled this way onto the bottom of your library in a random order. I loved this card. As soon as I saw it, I thought this is awesome. It's really... For me, when I think about your cube and fun and big splashy plays, this kind of embodies that because it's all 5 colors. It's a battle to get it out, and you've got to obviously attack, and you've got to get the loyalty, if you want to call it that, down. And then if you do, you get this Awaken the Maelstrom, which is another word soupy kind of card. Awaken the Maelstrom is all colors. It's a sorcery you get to cast after taking all 7 loyalty counters off. Target player draws 2 cards. You may put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield, create a token that's a copy of a permanent you control, distribute 3+1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 creatures you control, destroy target permanent and opponent controls.
Catching your breath.
Incredible.
All caught up?
If this isn't the definition of I'm having fun, you're probably not, but I certainly am. And this to me just embodies what I want to be doing when I play a cube like this.
Well, it is the image that I use for the Cube Cobra for the cube. So you're correct in that
Beautiful.
it embodies the cube so much. I chose it for the hand because it's got all the hands. The Awaken the Maelstrom has a bunch of hands coming in. And in my head, everybody wants to play the cube, so everybody's reaching for the card. So it's exactly the kind of style I'm going for. Plus, it just I love cards that a Wooburg, and it's got 2 pieces of art, and it has more words than most poems made by humanity. So yeah, it's awesome.
Words.
I love it.
Lot of words. Anthony.
Oh yeah,
it's only right for you
It's fantastic.
to talk about this one because this is a pet card of Anthony's for sure. Tell us about this one.
We'll do Kenrith, the Return King.
Yes.
And I'll kind of give a little bit of premise to that. So, but first, Kenrith, Return King for 4 colorless and a plains. You get a legendary creature, Human Noble, and then Word Soup. Basically, pay 1 red. All creatures get trample and haste until the end of the turn. And then 1 colorless and a forest. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature. And then 2 colorless and a plains. You get you can gain 5 life. And then oh my god, it just keeps going. And then 3 colorless and one island. You get to draw a card. And then this was my favorite one actually. It is for 4 colorless and a swamp. You basically get a reanimator effect from your graveyard, put it on the battlefield. This card, well, so we don't talk about the commander thing here much, but the reason why Stu alludes to this is I built, and you'll appreciate this, I'll have to show it to you. I promise we will not play commander at CubeCon. I just want to hand you this deck so you can giggle. David, it'll make you smile. I'll just bring it just to show it to you and then put it away.
I do love giggling.
It is literally alternate win cons, like triskaidekaphobia nonsense. And all I'm using is piecemealing this just consortium of, it looks like Always Sunny in Philadelphia where Charlie's doing the pin board where he's trying to solve all the problems is the meme. That is literally kind of the live the dream of commander. But that's why I love this card. Do you find that in this environment, this card is just a powerhouse that people latch onto it often?
Or even an enabler, I want to say, for, obviously you've got so much going on there for the 5 colors. Like, how much of an enabler is this for all of those individual color strategies and even segment strategies?
Yeah, so King Kenny, as he's lovingly referred to, he does a really cool role in the cube in that, if you're an enfranchised, somewhat Magic player, King Kenrith is a known quantity. People know it's a strong card. It was really strong in Standard. He's got a bunch of words, so he must be good. 5 mana, 5/5. But what he secretly does, he's secretly an aggro card in a cube that is touted as a non-aggro cube. Like a 6 mana, 5/5 trample haste is actually pretty strong for the cube. I have the Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, which is a 6 mana, 6/6 haste trampler. A bunch of other words too, which are the secret hooks, the secret dreams the cube lives. But that by itself is enough to end the game. And so he's a secret way to make aggro a thing without explicitly stating that it's an aggro cube. So that's kind of the role he provides. You mostly People play him, attack for 5, next turn, probably end the game. The game ends right there. But, he does give you a build around. You can build a reanimator around him. For a while, I had Zerda in there to kind of do a lot of activated ability, synergy decks and stuff like that. But it's a known synergy, and he's an aggro deck. A lot of comments I get about the cube is it's confusing. I think there's probably, I would guess this cube has the most words of a 540 card cube of most any cube ever made. I would guess, because I chose very wordy cards, so it had all the hooks in there. A lot of people, unless maybe thinking like, let me prove you wrong, which is a good thing. Maybe there's a cube that's just like the wordy cube. They're like, here's ice cauldrons, and
there
and
is.
Stuff. Yeah, that cube.
There
All
is
right,
a wordy cube.
All right, you got me, wordy cube. You beat me at it.
I think they have 360 cards though. So I think you win by quantity.
I'll take my ESPN.
If we don't call this to live the dream,
excited.
can we call this a partridge in a pear tree also? That'd be great.
Yeah, there's like 7 names for this cube. You call it whatever the heck you want. Another good thing that Kinrith does is a lot of people look at this cube, and like I said, there's a lot of wordy cards. In theory, I hope that when people see a card, like they see Blast of Genius or Arcade Bombardment or Fire Emancipation, or these weird cards that are build arounds, they can take it and still feel safe that they'll be supported in that theme. As I say that makes me really want to take out Luris, because I think that's the big outlier that doesn't support this fact. But for King Kinrith, I'll take King Kinrith, and maybe I'll be safe just building around King Kenny. And you probably will be, and that's what I like about a lot. Because some cubes, maybe you're drafting like a more good stuff, normalized cube, like a standard cube or modern cube or arena cube, and it's kind of hard to know where you should go. Is this card good? Is this strategy good? But if you pick a card in this cube, ideally it's supported. So that's kind of another thing that King Kinrith does, is he makes you feel safe.
David, would you mind taking on Garth the One-Eye? This is another fascinating choice you've put in here that I'm in love with.
Oh, sure. Well, Garth the One-Eye is a Wooburg, so one of each lands, 5/5, a legendary creature. Basically, you tap him and you choose one of 5 cards from the very first set of Magic the Gathering, and you get a token of that card that you can cast. It is the only card in the game that does something like this, that it can bring in tokens of existing cards into the game. But it was a way for me to play the Dual Masters Black Lotus in my game of Magic the Gathering, which is the token that I use for Garth. And if any card could be a Live the Dream card by itself, Garth One-Eye fills that hole quite well, and it lets you play Shivan Dragon and Terra and all these cool old cards that you don't get to play with anymore. So that's the role he lives. Now Garth is also a power outlier in that he's lower than most cards. I've kept him in here because of the goodness and unique gameplay he can provide. But he's a 5-color card that when you play him, he doesn't do anything, and that's not. It's really hard to survive with that in the level of power cube this is. But he lives because he's just so unique. He's Garth.
Yeah, it's a fascinating choice. And of those cards that he produces, I think May and I agree that, sure, there's a Black Lotus, but there's definitely a Shivan Dragon on that list, and quite possibly the greatest Magic card ever created.
Shivan Dragon. Make copies of the Shivan Dragon.
Let's go.
I want to make an army of the Shivan Dragon. The real Live the Dream.
You have a Brutaclad in here, so you can make artifact copies of it. I think you can actually combo off a Brutaclad, the Iconoclast, whatever it is. It's a great little combo you can do with making copies of Shivans.
Yeah,
oh my god, it's gross.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean the Melissa Benson Shivan Dragon art is one of my favorite pieces of Magic art of all time.
Yes.
And in fact, the card behind me, Soul Advocate Eternal, which is a Heroes of Realm card that I won and designed, I partnered that with Shivan Dragon so that I can have Shivan Dragon in the command zone of my Rule Zero Commander games.
Hilarious.
that is sick.
All right, so let's move on to, we're going to talk about some premium mana rocks. And the reason why we've brought a couple of these up is, again, because of this heavy 4 and 5 color theme that we've got in the cube, right? So the first one I'll talk about is Chromatic Lantern, basically 3 colorless artifact. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and it also has tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And then we also have Timeless Lotus. This is a 5-color artifact. It's a legendary, and it has enters the battlefield tapped, but tap, add Wooburg. These are obviously pretty premium in a cube where those 5 colors are so premium. Tell us about how your thought process was for just what mana rocks you wanted to include in this. Because obviously you want to stay low to the ground. You want them to be, they are in essentially setup cards for these first like 2, 3, 4 turns before you can start casting those big splashy spells. So tell us your thought process about what mana rocks you included, why you did not include some, and why you included the ones that you have.
Yeah. So, for instance, this cube has generally 1 to 2 mana more average mana value of most other cubes. Like you were talking earlier, this turns 1 and 2, maybe even 3, are just loading screens for the rest of the game. So I wanted to throw every 2 mana rock you could shake a stick at in the cube. So, all the signets. You don't have the talismans because they hurt you, and hurting yourself is bad, so people don't like to do that.
But there's no aggro. I mean,
what?
sure, but there's no aggro, right? So surely the talismans would be okay.
Yeah, the talismans could be in, Painlands could be in there, but people just don't like hurting themselves. It's bad. Like, you look at Misty Rainforest, and you look at a dual land that gives you life. Gaining life is good. Losing life is bad. So I've eventually found that I can live without the talismans, especially without the talismans, and I wanted every 2 mana rock I could shake a stick at. When it comes to 3 mana, I did not want any 3 mana add 2 colorless, because the idea of this cube is it's very colorful, and that lots of you playing 4-ish color decks. And if you have, a 3 mana add 2 colorless, or even a 4 mana add 2 colorless, it doesn't tell you to play lots of colors. It tells you to play 1 color. That's just not what I want you to do for the cube. So for 3 mana rocks, I've chosen all the ones that let you play any color. So Cultivator's Caravan, Chromatic Lantern, Skyclave Relic, cards like this let you cast mana of any color. So 2 and 3 is kind of exactly what you'd expect. There isn't Soul Ring, of course. There isn't, other cards that add 2 or more mana. 4 mana, I think, is kind of the fun world. 4 mana does have Hedron Archive, which, David, Hedron Archive adds 2 colorless mana. You just said that's not what you want to do. Yes, but it also draws you cards. And in a cube that's built around lots of mana, I want there to be some card flow, and maybe even some build around the Hedron Archive. Maybe you're playing a card that cares about you drawing more cards a turn, which a lot of the cards do. This mana rock can let you do that. I even had the 6 mana one, Dreamstone Hedron, but I figured, David, even for this cube, a 6 mana rock that all it does is add mana, maybe you should get to playing Deploying Threats at some time in your life. Hello? So I want to have that one. However, I'd say the mana rock that exemplifies Live the Dream Cube the most is Empowered Auto Generator. You don't see that one hardly anywhere. That is a 4 mana rock. ETB's tapped. But when you tap it, you add a counter to it and then add mana of any color equal to the number of counters you have on it. So you play it on turn 4 or whenever. Then on turn 5, you tap it, add 1 mana. Then you add 2 mana. Then you add 3 mana. And it kind of starts batting, above its weight class pretty quickly. And the reason why I have this card in here is A, it adds any number of mana. B, it has some hooks. It's a mana rock with hooks. Maybe you have Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, or you have Vizier Tumbling Sands, where you have these other cards and these other permanents let you untap permanents. Normally you untap a land, but maybe you untap your Empowered Auto Generator. And then you're comboing off with your mana rock, and you're living the dream of this mana rock adding 4 mana for you. You only put 4 mana into it 2 turns after you cast it, and you're casting these cards way ahead of time. You're casting your 9 mana spells on turn 6. And that's why I try to look for cards like that really let you combo with other cards you wouldn't expect to combo with mana rock. So that's kind of my favorite rock. And
that's cool. And I will say, I think the Hedron Archive, those kind of mana rocks, I think they're a little underappreciated, because I'm a big fan of cards that are designed to do something, but then also have this secondary, pretty powerful effect. I love ramping, and I love drawing cards. It's kind of a cool thing to do, right? And that does exactly both of those things. So I don't know, but I love seeing those kind of cards, especially in something like this where you're not so worried about the speed of them. I'm happy at 4 mana to put something like that out, even 6 mana to put something like that out. So yeah, very cool.
Your mana, as far as the multicolored, kind of hits around 3, like Skyclave Relic, for example. But then I was going to ask, Coalition Relic, is that too fast forward for this cube environment as far as getting the expedited mana?
Yeah, so I made sure a lot of times when I'm making cubes, especially this cube, and I'm comparing 2 cards, I generally don't want there to be a clear winner in a pack. I don't want you to see Soul Ring next to something, that adds a colorless mana for 2 mana, because there's one strictly better. I don't want a Lightning Bolt and the Shock generally in the same format. Maybe I'm supporting a instant burn strategy, and I kind of am forced to based on the card pool. But here in Paper Cube, you have access to basically any card ever made. So I made sure to be careful that you don't see a pack of Chromatic Lantern and Coalition Relic, because Coalition Relic is basically strictly better. Again, strictly is not always true, but Coalition Relic lets you have 2 mana for 3 mana, and for colorless, that's just too much. That's too much, man, as they say. Let green do that. Like green, I've got cultivate. Green's thing is ramp, and I want every color to ramp. But part of green's identity is more efficient ramp. Green has 1 mana creatures that add mana. Green also has 3 mana creatures that add 2 mana. I've got Salvella, Heart of the Wilds, Shaman of Forgotten Ways, a Somberwald Sage, stuff like that. And those are 3 mana rocks that let you add more than 1 mana. And that's kind of green's identity here in this colorful keyword soup cube.
So you're kind of talking about green's identity. I think you'd put a question out on Twitter a while back, and I responded. I don't know if you noticed, but it was along the lines of, would you play Harrow in this cube? And basically, I'm the evil player that would cancel a Harrow every day, all day, because I got to strip mine you with a cancel. And I think that was kind of your question you projected. So you wanted your green to be kind of the rampant growth kind of, or whatever, consistent, but not really setting you back type of ramp, like the Harrows and the new card that does the same thing.
Yeah, there are not many cards that sacrifice with a cost to casting cards. And yes, this was for the Arena cube. So I do not have Harrow anymore in this cube. I saw it counter spelled once. It was like turn 5 or something. And then I was like, we're done here. So green still should be the most efficient at ramping, but in a cube that tells you to play expensive cards with lots of colors, I have to have a lot of colorless mana ramp in there. So green is still the best at it, but colorless can still do it.
So we're going to kind of move on past the ramp. The ramp's pretty consistent. It's really beautiful. It's well done and executed, and I love it. I didn't want it to pull away from green's empowerment of moving the curve along, but simultaneously you want to be about 3. But now we're going to move over to something that I added again today to my Powered Vintage Cube that I chased all over the Raleigh-Durham area. And it was surprisingly, right? And you would think there was only one because I had such a hard time finding this card. I went to 4 stores to get the one ring. Stu, would you mind reading this? It's a lot of words.
Yeah. So this is, and let's preface this. This is one of the most notorious cards and one of the most just bananas. I love everything. I have 3 copies. I don't know why you felt that you needed to make it so difficult for yourself, but I ran out and got 3 copies as soon as I could. This is the One Ring. It is from the recent LTR, Lord of the Rings set. It is a 4 colorless mana legendary artifact. It has indestructible. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. You may tap and put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring.
And I want to use this as an opportunity to apologize to a listener where May and I talked about cards that broke our environment part 2. And this came up and a listener said that they had an instance where a player was bouncing this over and over again and then using it and bouncing it. Literally that Friday after I cubed with my good friend Nathan in his Almost Legends cube, I bounced it 3 times. So I broke this card. So I apologize to the listener that I said that was the perfect storm because apparently it wasn't as perfect because I did it literally 2 days later. So that's my Uber Cube, Uber Bear. I'm so sorry that I said this card is uber busted.
Let's be clear though. You don't need to bounce this card for it to be absolutely bonkers as far as how powerful it is, right? Even if you just cast it and then start tapping it to draw cards and even just gaining that protection, the flavor about the set that it comes from, the art, the lore with the One Ring. This is, I love this. I cannot express how much I love this card. I think it's incredible.
May, you had a thought?
But no, I was just affirming because we had that conversation and I was like, this card's busted. And you're like, oh, it's great.
No, it's busted. David, what was your design idea of putting this in here? Does this feel like this is another one of those power outliers that are going to draw players in? Because I'll tell you that every cube I've seen it in, it pulls me in like it's precious.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you about the design process of putting it in there. I knew we were making it and I knew it was strong and it's cool. So I put it in. There we go.
Great. Perfect.
Fun.
Moving on.
Now, fun. You don't need anything else,
with
right?
a lot of playtesting, can it be too good? Very well could be. I had Chaos Defiler in here for a long time. Chaos Defiler is a 5-mana black-red card. It's a 5/4 trampler that when it enters the battlefield or dies, you basically destroy target permanent. And I love that card because it tells you to reanimate it. It's black and red. I made it. There's lots of cool things about it. But eventually, after too many playtests, it didn't actually have any cool agency involved in it. It just was a high-rate monster that you pick and you kill people with it. The One Ring might be that. And maybe I should cut it. I don't know. I hadn't thought about it that much, honestly.
Not until I get to play it at CubeCon, okay? Cut it after that.
Cut it after that? You
Yeah,
want me to cut
after it
for
gets
Sarah
passed to
Paragon?
me. After.
Okay. All right.
No,
So
Lure
keep
is
the
for
one.
Sarah Paragon.
Lure is for Sarah. Oh, okay.
The
Wait.
Uber ring.
Cut the bad cards, put in the good cards. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, this card we've talked about ad nauseum on the show. I think it's beautiful. I think it really does hit all the marks you're looking for as a designer. It does live the dream, if not for one person. And I do have a follow-up question. Are there a lot of effects in here where a player could abuse it? Like I stated, where I'm literally bouncing it back to my hand. I'm quote-unquote artifact unsummoning it, if you will, right? Into the royal type stuff. Is that possible in here?
Yeah, there's a couple of one-offs, but I don't think I've ever put something in here that's repeatedly bouncing, unless you use more than one card to do it. So, maybe. I don't see it. There's 43 cards that return cards to hands, and I don't see any of those being repeated ones, so I think I'm good, famous last words, but maybe even as...
You'll find out at CubeCon.
Yeah, we'll find out at CubeCon. At CubeCon, I remember someone drafting Minsk and Boo, Timeless Heroes, hearing, what is this doing in the cube? And my intention as designer was, well, no one wants to play red-green. I'll give you a reason to play red-green. And,
the monkey paw curled.
Yes. Did Minsk and Boo, Timeless Heroes survive to be featured in the next CubeCon? It definitely did not. So, I think about so much as a designer and a player that, I'm not right all the time. In fact, I'm not right most of the time. But,
If you catch up with me at
Playtesting is very
CubeCon,
important.
I've got a dope Boo token I can definitely give you that's artist altered. I've got multiple of them. Catch up with me. It's crazy. He's wearing like a clown hat and stuff. It's insane. Mm-hmm. But we're going to move over to something that, and Stu and I talked about this one. This is kind of our pre-gaming back porch session where we talked about like after we cubed your cube and we had a conversation, and it was about your take an extra turn package. And I want to do a kind of we're going to be a little biased on our side of the fence, so go ahead and get your shields up. But I have questions about this, and I'll kind of hit the home. This stuff like Part the Water Veil, Elrond's Empathy, Temporal Mastery, which is kind of an outlier here, Beacon of Tomorrows, and Temporal Trespass.
Temporal Mastery is not a bit of an outlier here. It's a huge outlier just by virtue of the fact that it has 1 and a blue for a miracle. I feel like the other card, they have cool effects, but they're much more expensive. I don't know if this tracks with your playtesting, and David, maybe you can expand on this a little more, but can you attest if that's been the case? Because that to me does look like a bit of a power outlier, the fact that you can miracle an extra turn. The caveat to that, and maybe where I would say, even though it is a power outlier, it's not a problematic power outlier, is the fact that if you get it in one of those early turns where typically, all right, you can get the early ramp and things are awesome, then it's maybe not quite as a big deal as it is in a much more efficient cube environment where those first 2 and 3 and 4 turns are so much more critical, right? Those first 2, 3, 4 turns in your cube are more set up. So does that kind of track with either your playtesting or why you just wouldn't consider this an outlier?
And to give some context to our conversation we had is with these high mana cost take an extra turn stuff, we felt like you had to have a board state to overrun and then overrun again. I think we equated it to multiple like kind of raid effects.
I think you're expected
because
right?
we were
6, 7, 8,
because
9
we're
mana.
spending a turn to take a turn was our thought process, and I wanted to get specifically your thoughts on that with these high mana cost, high yield cards. Did you expect the player to have, I guess, a board state for an overrun type of idea here?
Yeah. So when it comes to power levels, Temporal Mastery, I think, is underneath cards like Alrund's Epiphany, or even perhaps Part the Water Veil, or maybe even Temporal Trespass, because you can cast it for 3 mana. Every time I've ever seen any Time Walk be a problem, it's generally been Alrund's Epiphany, because it can also be a threat. It can win the game. Temporal Mastery does have Miracle, which is the only card with Miracle in the cube, and that's a point against it. But out of my choices of Time Walks, it fits because it does let player live the dream. It lets you spin the wheel. It gives you a reason to draw cards on your opponent's turn. This cube, out of most cubes, Time Walks are often not a way to have additional combats, but it lets you activate Planeswalkers twice, and this cube also has all the cards that are permanent and say copy your next instant or sorcery spell in the game. I have them all. I have the Rawl Zarek for 4 mana that does it. I have Double Vision, the red enchantment that does it. I have all the cards that let you cast a spell twice. So Time Walks are mostly for that. Mostly Time Walks are used in decks red decks, red or blue red X decks, lets you time walk twice, and then we're getting to the real primo stuff. Otherwise, honestly, a lot of the times I see time walks as ramp spells, even when hard cast. I want to ramp from 7 to 9 a lot of times in this cube, which is like a funny thing to say, but that's what this cube's about. One point in this cube that I will say real quick is that I do not have tutor effects. There are no cards that search for unambiguous cards without certain effects on them. I think I have Captain Sisse. She looks for legendary spells, but I don't have Vampiric Tutor or Imperial Seal or anything like that. So you can't set up these, I'm going to cast something into my Miracle Time Log, or I'm going to cast your aforementioned loved Yenid into Emrakul. That's not a thing that can happen. You got to spin that wheel, baby. So that's kind of why I have that Miracle card in the queue to begin with.
No gamble?
No future.
Well, and I think that's the kind of, and I love that. That's one of the sort of the points is that even though I don't know, and I would consider it a power outlier, the because it has that miracle, but it isn't in this cube because those earlier turns aren't as important as they are in those hyper fast cubes, and I think that's what's so cool about it.
It's a neat design philosophy. That's what we were trying to analyze. We're looking from the outside of the windows, pressed against the glass, looking at the pies, wondering what your thoughts were, right? On were you trying to, we were trying to deduce it. I said, he's got to be doing this for like, I've got a state, I'm overrunning. Stu kind of said ramp. I kind of said, maybe you want to draw another card. But it's really, I'll be honest with you, I never thought about the hit another planeswalker. Because he does have a huge density of planeswalkers in here.
That is actually something that we've got in our notes, and let's talk about that now because I think the planeswalkers definitely beget discussion in anything when we're talking about a cube that has the numbers that yours has, right? Because you got a lot of planeswalkers in your cube, and as May alluded to, May has obviously done her homework as she does on all of her episodes because she is so detailed. I went back 2 years and looked at the cube list from a couple of years ago, and then I looked at the cube list from today. And boy, has the Planeswalker numbers changed and the CMC changed, right? I don't know if it was just, I didn't spend 10 years looking at it, but I spent some time just reviewing the kind of Planeswalkers that were in there. Tell us a little bit about how you've made those decisions when it comes to the CMC, right? Because there was only a couple, 3 or 4, 3 CMC. Now you've got, and there was no like Liliana of the Veil, for example, that's in there now. Liliana the Last Hope, that's in there now. What has been the sort of the decision-making process when adding Planeswalkers to their cube?
No Tybalt.
To the cube. No Tybalt.
And if I could add another one that is adjacent, is what ended up pushing that decision to make Golgari the Planeswalker colors. Because that's where a lot of that density comes from.
I was going to bring that up, exactly. So, good question. So, Planeswalkers, I love Planeswalkers. I mean, I dressed up as them as multiple Planeswalkers. I think
Jace,
they do.
Is that you?
Jace Hasse, yeah. They do a lot of good for Magic the Gathering, both in terms of narrative storytelling and in terms of mechanics. They're pretty complicated. That's like the rough part of them. But I've kind of thrown these cards have a lot of words on them, reasoning out the window for this cube to hit all my other goals. So Planeswalkers in this cube function more as removal spells in this cube than other cubes. If you look at most Planeswalkers in this cube, which you've done your homework, there's like 50 of them or so, I think you said?
42.
42, yeah.
42. Yeah, that rounds up to 50. Most of them are used as removal. Most of them are used as removal spells, but they give you agency. So, like I said before, blue spell decks are often the stronger decks. So a lot of my decision making in this cube is to let the other colors be on par with them in terms of fun and directions that the blue-red has. So Planeswalkers are both removal spells for the decks that do play permanent spells, that play rocks or something, and they're also threats for these big, expensive, these decks that play expensive spells. So they're mostly used as mid-range removals. I count them as interaction. Like I count interaction points, not just removal points. Because like, is unsummon removal? Is like, make a creature smaller removal? I don't know. It's all weird. So they're mainly used for that. They've increased mainly because as I've made this cube, blue has always been the strongest color. Weird, right? So I've done lots of little things to make blue not as strong. There are fewer blue cards than other cards in the cube. There are fewer rats that destroy, all the creatures. There's more ways to interact with mana rocks. And I've been upping the other cards' turns of strength. Green example, how do you make green stronger? You add more 1 mana creatures that add mana. Boom, did it. How do I make red stronger? I have more spells that the blue-red spell decks would not like to see against each other. For a while, I had Viashino. It's a 5 mana 2/2 that when you play, you get to cast an instant or sorcery from their hand. I saw that do really cool things, but it's just a little too narrow. For black, how do I make black stronger? I'm not playing Thoughtseize. That is just not this kind of cube. I will play 2 mana spells that kind of care about the card you're discarding, but mainly I put in the 2 Lilianas, Liliana of the Veil and Liliana of the Last Hope. And those are ways for me to still put pressure on the blue-red decks without playing stuff like Thoughtseize or whatever. Green-black used to be graveyard-oriented. It turns out green-black likes graveyards. Who knew? And that was, it's really changing the game there, David. So that's how it did for a while. But I wanted there to be a reason for people to play Planeswalkers. The initial version of this cube was honestly 10 commander decks I had designed, pushed together, most of them focusing on card types. So blue-red like instant sorceries, green and white like creatures, green and blue like lands. And if you have themes based on card types, that lets you have more hooks into the game than you would normally have otherwise. So if black-white only cared about life gain, most cards don't have life gain on them. If you change black-white to be a reanimator, well, black-white has creatures, and all the cards have creatures, so it lets you kind of spread your themes around the different colors and not just be on rails every color pair. Green-black focuses on planeswalkers because that is a card type that every color has access to, and it lets you have more unique gameplay, because maybe now your your Wrath of Gods have more importance to me. Ways to copy abilities can do things. Token doublers, or token enhancers, such as Divine Visitation or Delving Season, really go crazy with Planeswalkers. And that lets you have a more unique experience than like, green-black rock, I'm going to reanimate a creature, which black can already do because of black-white reanimator, or have creature-oriented because green-red does care about creatures. So it gives you the hooks to still have a unique style of gameplay.
I'm going to ask a question, and I do this from time to time as the player to the curators here. How much do all of you use planeswalkers in your cube design to manage power level between color pairs, color tries, color quads, color quints, right? Or even color solos? It's what you said is so true, right? Blue, you could argue that blue has kind of been historically a bit of a power outlier in Magic over the course of its history. How do you look to use planeswalkers to balance the power and the power level, right? And David, we can start with you. We're talking about your cube. We can talk about this one specifically. May and Anthony, if you want to chime in about your cubes overall. But David, has that been something you've consciously done, or do you think that that's maybe just something that's organically happened? Is that there's been a balance of power using planeswalkers?
Yeah, I generally don't look at card types to balance power. I want to figure out what the problem I'm trying to solve with the power. Like, for instance, blue-red is really good. How do I fix that? Do I add in, like, strong black cards? No, I add in cards that will target that color pair's deck archetype, but not look out of place in the cube. So Liliana does that, but also Liliana is a favorite character in the game. Like, she's an awesome character. People love Liliana, and I also have a lot of memories of playing with Liliana Veil in Standard, in Modern, in Legacy. Like, I played this card a lot, and it brings me joy seeing it, and it does have, like, options. Like, there is agency in playing the card. Like, when you tick up Liliana the Veil, what do I discard? Also, Reanimator is a thing, so she also fits into that archetype of the cube. So Planeswalkers give you lots of hooks and directions and agency, and also tends to make the cube want to play more creatures, because creatures are the main way to remove planeswalkers, and it increases creature combat, which is something this cube certainly needs. Magic has been trending that way, because creature combat is the main way you interact with your opponent, but this cube, more than most, needs more creature-oriented combat because it's so big spell-based. So that's the role that I did when adding planeswalkers to my cube, is more they just filled the roles I want, not that planeswalkers are more powerful or whatever.
May, you have something to add.
Why not Winding Constrictor?
So Winding Constrictor tells you, it uses up one of my few 10-ish gold slots for that color pair, and it tells you to care about cards with counters on them. Mm-hmm. It was close. I'd rather just have another Garrick in there that's 2 colors than Winding Constrictor.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was a thought. I mean, it's probably like the 15th green-black gold card. I've also added in, to go on a tangent, for green-black, I did add in Casualties of War, despite it not being planeswalker-oriented and being land destruction, because looking at the numbers, both on digitally and just my friends playing the cube, and people that aren't you're playing my cube, you're just my friend by default, even if I don't know who you are. People don't like playing green-black. They want to play the other colors. And you know what? Gosh darn it, I'll give you reason to to live the dream with your removal spell and actually have a 6-mana land destruction spell.
I like green black. I represent some green.
Oh
black.
yeah, the rock is my
Absolutely.
go-to. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't say people don't like green black. They don't like drafting green black in this cube.
Oh, I will now. Challenge
In
accepted.
context,
Challenge
challenge
accepted.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that and the One Ring. I want to do some highlights of the Cascade. For the purposes of the listeners, I will have all these images, but as clearly David has stated, he has chosen the wordiest words of all words. I mean, it's Robert Frost on every one of these, or Stephen King even better, describing the gnat on the wall, the mosquito as it moves and flickers. But May, would you mind taking on Maelstrom Wanderer, which I feel like really embodies the idea, and it's wordy, and I love doing that to May. It makes me laugh.
You really do just
You
love doing
curveball all the time. This is how I get you with big cards.
all the time. It's okay. It's fair. It is.
I mean,
penance for my sins that I brought onto the podcast.
Come on, man. Maelstrom Wanderer has 7 words. You can do this.
Oh, could you read the flavor text?
And several things for my text.
we don't count reminder text here.
5 blue, red, green for Maelstrom Wanderer. Commander players love it. The Commander players hate it. It is a legendary creature elemental 7/5. Creatures you control have haste. It also has Cascade. When you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile non-land card that has a mana cost less than this. Then put the exile cards at the bottom of your library at the random order. I'm pretty sure I messed it up. Whatever. I'm reading all the text on
No, you got it.
Just to get you back.
We won't make you do the
I
reminder
agree
text on every one of these.
Look, you don't need that. You don't need that reminder text on there, okay? Like that was evil from Anthony. From
But
Bear.
there's
Bear is evil. We got
that's
an evil
evil.
bear.
That's evil.
That's evil bear.
That's
that
evil.
Comes along from time to
But
time.
I feel like Maelstrom Wanderer, all jokes aside, really embodies another one of the aspects of this cube, what you wanted to push as a designer. Like, Cascade is living the dream. It is spinning that wheel, Pat Sajak, try not to go bankrupt. I love it.
Yeah, so David White, who helped me with the initial versions of Live the Dream Cube and still from now, that's his favorite mechanic in the game. So I also love Cascade and Maelstrom Wanderer. I made a little show called Commander Versus, not to plug other shows. I don't do it anymore.
Always plug them.
Maelstrom Wanderer was my very first multiplayer deck I featured on that show. Cascade does so many things. It makes you build your deck differently. You care about what you're drafting. Maelstrom Wanderer itself has a build around it that your creatures have haste. It's expensive. You spin the wheel. If you ever seen the art for Forge Devil, it's this little devil guy like rubbing his hands together. That's exactly what you want to do when you see that card and you're using the Cascade mechanic, which is, I think, the Cascade mechanic is one of the most fun mechanics we've ever made, and I think it's the most fun mechanic for this cube. And I try to put in as many Cascade cards as physically possible in this cube. So you're absolutely correct.
I think it's wonderful because
Cascade into Cascade into Cascade.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or let's not stop there. Let's not just stop with Cascade. Let's maybe talk about Apex Devastator for 10 mana as a green spell where you get to Cascade
Into Cascade. Which is
into
that's a lot of Cascade.
So, yeah,
that's more than waterfalls right there.
I love it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, Cascade is also a real easy knob for me because, like I said, most of the cards in this cube, besides ramp and flowy spells, let you play the game of Magic the Gathering, have dreams to live. For example, Bituminous Blast is just a 5-mana deal for damage removal spell, but you Cascade, so this removal spell has a dream to live. So even my removal spells have secret dreams, or not so secret dreams, that let you experience something even when you're just dublating Advanced Range or what have you.
And so I actually have my favorite out of this subset. And I'll give you a little bit of context here, David, because again, I know we only have like the 4 days of the greatest Magic in history happening soon, CubeCon 2023. And I know you can't be everywhere, but you have to be everywhere for this. I have a Munson cube. It's based on Eddie Munson from Stranger Things. It is a 180 Jun cube, completely based on metal. Every piece of art has to be metal. You have to listen to Metallica, Sepultura, etc. Animals Leader. You got it's hitting hard. It's screaming music. We do a little bit of bourbon or scotch while doing it. But the card is Noise Marine. This card is sick. Like, literally, it's this guy out with his bass guitar just laying waste. But for 4 colorless and 1 mountain, get a creature, a Traries Warrior. I think I said that right.
Astartes.
Astartes Troy. Either way. Cascade. And then it's got Sonic Blast. When Noise Marine enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to the number of spells you cast this turn to any target for a 3/2. Kind of goes in that venomous blast you talked about, like makes you want to drop this thing, and he's like, "Beong, beong," and then just people, you can win, right? I mean, I love this card. I love everything about it, and this is probably one of the most exciting Magic cards for no one else but me when it came out because I made a metal cube.
I like that.
Check out the episode.
I like you
It's
saying
sick.
it's a base because it is. It's got to be a base, and he's just gonna pull that that low E and just like pull it about 3 feet from the base and just let it go like boom.
It's sick.
Yeah, I mean, he's attacking a Necron base in the art, so it just makes sense as a bass guitar.
Yeah.
With a bass guitar, as you do. Send in the noise marine. All right, I got this, guys. All right, so let's kind of get into a little bit of the blink. I want to talk about Elishnorn, if you would, please.
Which one?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which mom?
Which mom?
The mother of machines.
Would you mind taking this one,
Mother.
So
Tell your
Elishnorn,
children.
Mother of Machines, 4 colorless in a planes, Vigilance 4/7, legendary Phyrexian Praetor. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. Pretty impressive.
I was going to ask that, actually. Is this the I get to live the dream, but David doesn't live the dream? Because that was going to be one of my point-out cards.
Yeah, so if you ask Justin Parnell if this card should be in the cube, he would say, absolutely not. Like, that's exactly
I think
how
I
he would
agree with
say
Justin.
it, because
Shut up.
it does say don't have fun opponent. If I could play all the Praetors without the bad line of text and just the good line of text for you, I would.
Sharpies.
This card is an interaction. It does stop your opponent from living their dream. I also have a rule with this cube. So there are 5 colors of Magic, right? I'm sure you all agree. They all can do really fun things, especially when you get to 8, 9 mana. You get to do big splashy things to do cool stuff. White cards don't really do that. They want to end the game early. They want to attack. They want to say, no, don't do the thing. And that's not what this cube is about. So anytime I have a white card that's strong enough to be played and has hooks to be built around, but is kind of a little unfun, I'm like, well, you know what? At least people will want to play the white card.
Well,
So-
you know how you fix it with a good old Sharpie.
Yeah, that's
Go,
right.
Sharpie.
Yeah.
That is true. I have gone through great lengths to not include custom versions of cards in this cube. Not for any other reason, but I just want people to know what they're drafting.
Yeah.
So that's why she's in here. She could get cut. Maybe she will be, but she's a white card that people actually want to play. It doesn't say, kill your opponent on turn 4 or whatever. So that's why she's in here right now.
Maybe
Hey,
she could
maybe
be
one day we'll get a 4-mana version that doesn't have the second half.
Maybe.
Maybe she could be part of an alternative win condition in your cube, where basically after the draft, if you've managed to draft all 5 Praetors, you just get to lay them down rummy style, and you just win the game immediately. What do you think about
I
that?
conceded
Yeah.
all
Well,
5
I like
pieces
that
of
idea.
Phyrexia.
I do have Realm Breaker, the invasion tree, in the cube, so that is somewhat a
Okay,
possibility.
cool.
It's a dream. So something that's a little bit more fair that I had to cut from the Fem cube that May and I have been working on together to really pull that in and rebrand it. I have to show that one to you. McDarby, again, in this 4 days that we have, I have to have at least 48 hours of your attention to see all my cubes. But
Yeah, I've already got 5 cubes on the line to look at and a commander deck.
yeah. So it's getting there. And I actually have about 9 cubes. So we're going to get a little bigger there. But Thassa, the Deep Dwelling for 3 colorless and 1 island. You get a legendary enchantment, Creature God, 6/5, indestructible. As long as your devotion to blue is less than 5, Thassa isn't a creature. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. And you can pay 3 colorless and 1 blue, tap another target creature. This card, I think, really embodies more of that blink from the fairness level for this cube, whereas Elishnorn, as we kind of, we put a finger in the eye a little bit there, it's the opposite of the dream. This is more of a dream. And I had to remove this from my cube because the indestructible, which leads me to a question that I had about your cube. Is indestructible protections and hexproofs actually a little bit of a volley you have to do as a curator too? Because I know she had some swords, you got this. I wanted to ask the question, how do you balance that cog in this environment?
Yeah, so indestructible is a good defensive keyword. I think it doesn't surprise people. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've had to point out that a certain card has Ward 2 on it or something. And, anytime anybody, kill the thing, Ward 2, don't do it. We redo, it doesn't matter. Protection is a tricky one. I think protection generally, we have realized now, protection is not a great keyword in terms of interactivity with the game of Magic the Gathering. You want to be able to interact with threats and stuff, which is why outside of weird sub-protection and the swords, there are no protection cards in my cube. That being said, there are protection. I've got 3 swords, Sword of Fire and Ice, Forge of Frontier, and Hearth and Home. Well, it's three swords, but it's red, blue, red, green, and green, white. I explicitly have them in colors that there are ways to destroy the sword. There's not a blue-black sword in here because blue-black can't destroy swords. I have those cards in here because I want to try to cultivate creatures attacking and not just no creatures on spells only, even though that's explicitly like the blue-red color pair. But I want creature combat to be more of a thing, and the swords have done a great job to get people to attack a lot. Indestructible, there are a decent number of exile effects in the cube, and stuff like Giver of Runes you cannot target itself. For example, I don't have Mother of Runes in the cube because she could just give her protection, and the game is pretty miserable. If you've ever been on the other side of Mother of Runes in play in any format, you're just like, well, I am having less fun now. Even let's say even you had no removal spells like in your hand or coming up, you're still going to feel bad because you're like, even if I did draw it, I can't use it. And that potential energy for negativity is not something I want to cultivate in my cubes. So that's why I don't really have any protection in the cube at all. But there are certainly ways around Indestructible, and I make sure there are exile effects as removal spells in the cube.
I do have a follow-up question on that based on something you said. It was kind of your shock versus lightning bolt versus conversation you had. You have Sword of Fire Ice in here, and then you have 2 other swords that are mentioned.
Correct.
So one's lightning bolt, and you have 2 shocks in my mind. I heard it immediately. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you were playing against a green-white deck, which sword would you like more? Sword of Hearth and Home or Sword of Fire and Ice?
I want to draw cards and shock.
Well, you're free. There's a thing that we say, and it's all opinions are held.
So we actually have some planeswalkers that we've highlighted that I kind of want to touch on just for the funsies. Some of them that you've done that, and I know we're getting close to time here, but you have some interesting ones. Some are a little different. We've got the Eternal Wonder. We're going to skip over that in like a speed bump. Everybody knows that card is Broco. But Stu, would you mind taking on the Valky here? This is pretty sick.
Valky, God of Lies. 1 colorless and a black for a legendary creature god. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card they revealed this way until Valky leaves the battlefield. And then you may pay X, choose a creature card exiled with Valky with converted mana cost X. Valky becomes a copy of that card. But wait,
There's more.
The flip side is Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter. For 5 colorless, 1 black, 1 red. As Tybalt enters the battlefield, you get an emblem with you may play cards exiled with Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. +2, exile the top card of each player's library. -3, exile target artifact or creature. And then -8, exile all cards from all graveyards. Add 3 red.
David, that really plays into the aspect you talked about of the Planeswalkers.
Lots of words.
Removal.
Lots of words.
So many
Yeah, there's so many options of this card, though. It's
So
Live the
many
Dream,
words.
and it's very wholesome. David, what was your choices behind putting this in the cube?
This is a good example of a hand disruption spell that isn't Thoughtseize, but also lets you live the dream of copying the opponent's spell that they have, and it's a 2/1 for 2, so it's just decently on rate, and it's just a good disruption spell. Oh, also, there's a whole nother card that's a strong, also for rate, 7-mana Planeswalker that can destroy anything, or be card advantage for the rest of the game, or live a crazy dream of casting tons of spells that have been cast that game. So it's so flexible, and it's disruption, and it has multiple dreams. Like, what if you had Elish Norn in play, and then you cast Valky? You get 2 creature cards, then you can become one of the 2 creatures you get. Also, it's a Planeswalker, so if you had Karth in play, it begins with more loyalty counters, and you can immediately ult when you cast it or something. There's so many little ways you can deal with this thing. Also, you can cast it with Luris from the graveyard, and that's great.
Did you add this in before the Cascade ruling was redefined?
I added this in the second it was released. Yes,
That's what I thought. Yeah, so people could live the dream by cascading into this and getting Tobalt potentially is what I'm asking.
they could. I don't think I ever saw, but it definitely would have been on Magic Online once before the rules changed. So, yeah, that's the thing, and I think that's great. There's 7 cascade spells in the cube. So if you draft one and draft that one and cast the cascade spell and Tybalt's the next card, you know what? You've earned your pie.
May, would you mind taking on Teferi, please?
Teferi, Master of Time, is 2 blue for legendary Planeswalker Teferi, obviously. And you may activate its loyalty abilities at any time you may cast an instant. +1, draw a card, discard a card. Pretty neat. Target creature you don't control phases out. Pretty cool. And I'm pretty sure it comes back at the next turn, yes. And -10, take 2 extra turns.
It's the -10
so that,
is
there's
the dream, right?
Live the dream,
is that the dream?
aspect.
Just the extra turns? I mean, David, you can nod your head 3 times if you're in duress right now, but I'm pretty sure the extra turns is why you're running this.
Well, it's actually a few reasons. So this card, like I said before, Planeswalkers often being removal. This isn't removal, but it is interaction. It gives sometimes lets you buy just enough time to cast whatever you need to cast to win or what have you. So it's interaction. It also is filtering. In a cube that by default you want to play 18 lands to play the game, sometimes you flood out. And Teferi makes sure you don't flood out. Also, blue-red has a sort of sub-thing of flashbacking spells from the graveyard. So maybe you discard your 9-mana red sorcery on turn 4 on their turn, so they don't even see it coming. So you discard that and then cast your Business Mastery to, blow them out or whatever you want to call it. So it has that sub-theme too. So it does lots of these different. It does lots of different jobs, but also just straight on the 10, boom, take 2 extra turns. That's what the game's all about. So maybe you copy that ability in some way. So yeah, Teferi does a lot of roles in this cube.
So David, got one more. So Planeswalkers are a problem. We got a high density. How do you deal with them? How about Garruk? Would you mind taking that one on? How do you kill the Planeswalkers? Planeswalker killer here.
Well, you attack, hopefully, is kind of the main way you kill Planeswalkers.
What about Garruk Apex Predator?
Well, it's a 7-mana spell.
It's fantastic.
So you should be rewarded for casting that. And hopefully you just, if there's a board, you can take care of it. And this cube 7-mana spell is kind of the du jour, good card level of the cube. So there's tons of those. And most of my removal is situated, the hard removal, in ways that can kill Planeswalkers. Like there isn't, a Doomblade in it. There is Murderous Rider. Not that I play Doomblade anyway, because it says, get punished for playing a certain color, which is not a thing that we should do really in Magic. But there's most removal, like Lethal Scheme or Pile On, stuff like that. That also can hit Planeswalkers to try to keep them from reigning supreme, even though in my playtesting, Planeswalkers aren't really the big scary boogie person of the cube. It's spells, decks that don't play permanents. That is kind of what is doing well.
So we're going to kind of move over to final thoughts here in the essence of time, right? And we've truly had an amazing time just talking with you. And I need to lock you down for now 50 hours at KubeCon. How long are we going to be there for?
You're going to have to pay David by the hour at this point.
You have to just send me the bill. Send me the bill. We'll just charge it to our Patreon. But but I truly appreciate you coming on the show. And so kind of the final thoughts is this is just big, huge. I mean, these are Shamu splashy, right? Like it's literally when you went to SeaWorld and they said, don't sit here and you didn't bring a raincoat. Well, you have made a mistake.
I got splashed by Shamu all those years ago. I am happy to say that I did.
And I would have to say that this was one of the most fun cubes I've ever drafted. And after sitting down, getting the opportunity to draft with you and Parnell and others, I think Stephen Green was there too, at least sideboarding in. It was amazing just to talk about and to kind of big brain the cube curation from a different level. I'm like this hyper efficient, spiky Johnny player that wants to move forward. But when I saw, again, we talked about at the beginning, Blasphemous Act, really redefined what cube could be.
I will actually credit this cube. We've talked about this. I maybe have mentioned it on a previous episode. Where this inspired me was I had, and this is Commander, so I'll talk about it real quick. I had a Commander deck. It was an Edgar Markov Vampires deck, and I started off building it. I think probably the way that a lot of people will build it, which is, hey, just put a bunch of 1 and 2 and maybe 3 CMC vampires and just flood the battlefield, use the Eminence ability of Edgar, and just turn creatures sideways. And then I played this, and I thought, you know what? There's something else I can do with this. There's something else I can do that's more fun. So I focused more on the big splashy plays. I focused more on the cordial vampires and the Matthias and all the cards that are going to give me some repeated value, and the cards that it's not just, hey, it comes in and hey, maybe you can turn it sideways, but if someone casts a 3 or 4 mana creature, it's ineffective at that point. And I will say that deck has become infinitely more playable, infinitely more fun. And I will say that I do like to play to win, but I've garnered a more fun driven way of playing not just EDH but Cube in general. And I love that things like this exist to give that kind of different perspective, right? Focus on the trying to win. There's plenty of people that want to win, but the fun and this kind of big splashy, big like grandiose achievements, if you will, and certainly I will call that an achievement. When I was banging out those Emrakul, the Promised Ends twice, Anthony, I'm ever so sorry.
Yep.
It just wasn't a good time for you.
Nope.
But that was just a wonderful moment for me in my years of cubing. So,
May,
yeah,
what'd you pick up from
incredible.
this episode? Do you have any final thoughts?
Colors.
That's Sarah Paragon.
How about you, David? Have you enjoyed yourself?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on the Uber Cube podcast with May, Anthony, and Stu. That's the name of the Cube podcast. I've never called it anything else in my life. And it's been an absolute delight chatting with, selfishly my Cube with you all, because you've asked lots of good questions. You've influenced the design of it, because I will be adding Sarah Paragon back. No promises on Lewis, but Sarah Paragon will be seen at CubeCon. And I look forward to chatting out. You've given me such very nice, kind words, and you've inspired me to work even harder at making this cube and other cubes.
So
and
deserved.
You all run a tight podcast, and I can't wait to listen to more and see you all at CubeCon in October.
Well, let's
Right.
move
I
into
get a
that.
player cube at CubeCon.
Yeah, let's move into that as we move into the end of this episode. Again, so much fun. Want to say a huge thank you to Mr. David McDarby, who is just a beautiful human being and has been a pleasure with this episode, and also when we got the absolute pleasure of drafting this cube at at MagicCon Richmond. Great time.
At SCGCon.
SCGCon Richmond.
So many
Wonderful time.
cons. This con, this con.
Yeah, and let's shout it out. CubeCon. It's in Madison, Wisconsin. It's October 19th through 22nd, 2023. This is going out around the middle of August. The last time I looked, there was
Tickets are
not a
gone.
lot of tickets.
They're gone.
left.
They're gone.
now.
They're gone.
Well, if they're gone, they're gone.
gone. No
So
more.
if you got a ticket, we're looking forward to seeing you there. And if you didn't get one, please make an
Are we
effort to be
scalping?
there.
Are we scalping now? Are we scalping?
I'm not scalping. I've only got one ticket, and I'm going to dang well be there.
Make sure you tune in to the Twitch stream.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Tune in to Twitch and check
They're
it
gonna
out.
be doing Twitch on all the featured cubes like they did last year, which is amazing. As a matter of fact, you can look about it was Cloud Goat Ranger, if I'm not mistaken, and Uber Bear's Artifact Cube is one of the featured, and was Live the Dream on there as well too, right?
It was. It was,
There
in fact, the
was.
final cube featured before the top 8 of the whole event.
It's pretty sick. Yeah, so if you want to see how this cube is played by people smarter than Stu and Anthony, definitely not May.
That is a very low bar. that
May
you're
we'll
setting
see you.
right now.
I think I got like 147 of 148, so it should be fine.
Y'all have too much faith in me. I'm going to the trivia thing, and I'm not prepared for it.
You're probably better prepared than anyone else that's, well, except for Mr. McDarby.
David, you're on my high list. Like whenever Gwen puts out the list and I start getting the app, I've got yours down. I've got the Devoid Cube. I've got the Dragons of Winter's Night.
Yep.
And definitely we're going to go with our good friend Derek Gallen's cube.
Yes.
And anything
Oh,
else
yes.
I can... it's so many cubes. I wish I could hit them all.
Yeah, I think one cube that's on one of my lists is the Fey Cube. I think people
Oh my
here are
God.
pretty familiar with that one, especially with the new
What
set
is the
coming
Fey
out.
Cube?
Right
Tell us
now.
about the Fey
no, I'm
Cube,
sorry,
guys.
I've never heard of it.
Never heard of it, yeah.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, Maze Cube. You're on my high list, and that I want to say hi to you and
Hi.
draft your cube. So
Sure.
yeah. So that makes sense to me. But I look forward to CubeCon. I'm playing all these awesome cubes. It's my favorite Magic event I've ever been to because Cube is great. Magic is the best game on the planet, and Cube is one of my favorite ways to play Magic. So I look forward to being there with you all. Yeah.
Sweet. Stu, so thank you thank you again, David. Bless up. Thank you. And thank you. That was a little J-Bro mimic I did
Bless
there.
up, baby.
But
Yeah, let's go, Wesco. Bless up, homie.
But if you could take us away with the socials, please.
Yeah, so as always, if you love the show, we would really appreciate a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. You can reach out to us on Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. If you would like to reach out to us via email, you got any questions about any of our episodes or about anyone in the UberCube podcast team, hit us up at ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com, or you can hit us up on our Discord, hashtag UberCube. We got a lot of people, got so many new people joining, and I'm going to do it again. I want to give a shout out to my my deck boast channel. If you've drafted some really cool deck, whatever the cube may be, come show us, tell us about why you drafted it, how you made it work, and your record. And we love to see all the cool decks and cubes out there. And as always, we're going to do what we do at the end of all our episodes here and say,
Happy cubing
Hey,
and
nobody messed it
spike
up.
magic.
It's a miracle.
it's a miracle.